voice can break the dark. A single spark ignites the heart. But if we turn when justice calls, the chains we forge will bind us all. When truth is silenced, when lies take hold, the cost is freedom, the soul grows cold. No one stands tall while another must fall. Freedom for one depends on freedom for all. We're mavericks of freedom, rebels in the fight, defending every voice, defending every right. For the moment we falter, the moment we stall, we lose our own freedom when we let others fall. You can't stand free while others kneel. When justice fades, it's freedom they steal. An innocent condemned, a crime unspoken, and with it the bond of liberty is broken. No tyrant rules without our consent. Oppression thrives where silence is spent. Stand for the weak, the silence the small, or freedom will crumble for us all. We're mavericks of freedom, guardians of the light, fighting for the truth, for what is just and right. For the rights of one are the rights of all. We rise or we fall by answering the call. Even those we may oppose deserve the rights we all uphold. For if we deny them what is fair, we build our own prison in despair. The fight's not easy, it never will be, but justice for one is the key to be free. We stand as mavericks, together we strive, defending the rights that keep freedom alive. We're mavericks of freedom, rebels in the fight, upholding every truth, protecting every right. When one is oppressed, we're all in the thrall. Freedom for one depends on freedom for all. So take a stand, let your courage rise. Defend the truth, don't compromise. For the soul of the world, the writing's on the wall. Freedom for one depends on freedom for
Greetings, Mavericks and new viewers. Tonight, direct and live from the Maverick News Network World Studios. This is Maverick News with Rick Walker.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Mavericks, new viewers, we have a barn burner for you tonight. Ruddi Bruce, trucker, freedom fighter, he's here, going to join us live to expose the hidden agenda behind the convoy. And this is in no way meant to discredit what the peaceful protesters were doing at the convoy. On the contrary, it's to expose the deception, the lies, the half-truths, the separatism, the traitorous behavior that has led us to this point, this pivotal moment in Canadian history. Stay with us. Truth, right after this.
Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out. of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, Maverick News. Defending free speech, free speech. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Once again, I'm not interested in reliving the convoy. I don't live in the convoy. I'd like to move on, but the convoy keeps on coming back because it's this moment of catalyst. It's just one of those moments in Canadian history that just keeps coming back to the surface because everything just seems to have centered right around that. And to help us make sense of that, to get to some real truth regarding the convoy and where we're at right now with Canada under threat of becoming the 51st state, and maybe more specifically, Alberta separating from Canada, we have Canadian trucker, Freedom Convoy promoter, I guess you could call him, Ruddi Bruce, who has been also doing a lot of podcasting. Hello, Ruddi. Welcome back to the
Hey,
program.
how you doing?
Good.
No, I still run the Ruddi Bruce broadcast and all of that. So
That's right. That's exactly right, which is what we're going to get to tonight, because you've been doing some interesting, shall I say, work. You've just done this series of interviews related to some of the work I've been doing, which is to say that you've been talking to people who have revealed really a hidden agenda within the convoy. And you're really exposing some people who went there and for their own reasons hijacked the convoy and engaged in, I would say, a degree of deception and left some people high and dry when it came to legal defense. So
big time.
So let's just roll this thing back so we can kind of understand how all of this happened. And folks, you got to stay tuned and listen to this story and listen carefully, because what we're going to share with you tonight will help you understand why Canada right now is at risk of really breaking apart. So Ruddi, and it's all got to do with the convoy. Just tell us all how you got involved, first of all, with that Freedom Convoy and why.
Well, I promoted the shit out of the first convoy.
Okay, so stop there for a second to explain. There was a separate convoy in 2019, which was really, in a way, a warm-up for what came later, this convoy in 2022. So what was the first convoy?
Well, the first convoy was originally started with the Yellow Vest movement. And so it started to take momentum, and then sort of halfway through, they changed the name to Oil and Gas, okay? And Glenn Carrot got involved at that time and a bunch of others. But I was doing 3 shows a day for a month solid promoting that convoy. I promoted the shit out of that convoy, okay? So after that happened, there was a lot of, shall I say, some underhanded stuff that kind of went on. I'm not going to get into too much detail about it because it's past tense. But anyway, some dirty shit went on. Not too over the top, but enough to get my attention. But anyway.
So if I can pause again for just a moment. So
sure.
This Yellow Vest movement got involved with organizing a convoy to go from essentially starting in Alberta to Ottawa. And it was, I guess, then repurposed by some people who turned it into an oil and gas protest. And
the
I do remember that.
Yeah, the original theme behind the Yellow Vest movement was a grievance against the government. Okay, after a lot of the shadiness that it had been doing, like with the SNC Lavalin thing and the the Solicitor General thing and a lot of
Trudeau
other stuff
tornado.
all rolled into
Yeah,
one.
just a lot of the
And
scandals
yeah,
that the Trudeau
yeah,
government had been
yeah.
facing.
So it started off as a grievance, and then when Glenn Carrot and then came into it, then it was turned into this oil and gas thing.
And we need to
Okay,
explain who Glenn Carrot is.
Glenn Carrot is well, he went into politics. Now I can't recall the town he's in, but he became an alderman or something of that nature in his town, something to do with the civil town or whatever civil thing. So he was involved in politics, and so anyway, he took up the front of it in his big red fire engine truck and led it all down the highway. And he refused to put on a yellow vest. Okay, so I was really ticked off at that, and he made a little bit of a joke out of it in one of his speeches on Parliament Hill. But the big thing about yellow vest was a sign of unity that came out of Paris. Okay,
Yeah.
and it was a sign of everybody being together on the same page. He didn't want to be on the same page. He wanted to be out in the limelight like he's Glenn Carrot and standing on his own little island. Okay, so that
And
was
so it became an oil and gas protest. Obviously, oil and gas money behind some of this. And
well, it was a joke. I mean, when they
yeah.
first got there, they were standing in a snowbank, on Parliament Hill, and it was just a farce. There was a guy named Guy Annable. Guy Annable, he passed away some time ago. But anyway, he was heavily involved in this, and he had started, before the convoy got there, he started a bunch of venues that they were supposed to attend. And when Glenn Carrot got there and everything, he shot down Guy Annable and never attended any of those events. Okay, which was a real letdown for Guy Annable because he put a lot of work into that. And I was pissed off over it and the rest of it. And it just turned everything upside down as to why the purpose of us going to Ottawa in the first place was. Okay. So that was hijacked. That's where I call it, was hijacked. Okay.
Yeah.
So when they finally got back, and
were you familiar
guys,
at that point with like the sort of the behind the scenes politics that was in play at the time and the separatist movements and all that?
There was a lot of, in fact, there was a lot of men from Montreal, protesters out of Montreal, who didn't go to that event because it had been switched, okay, from the Yellow Vest movement to this oil and gas thing. They shut down, I would say, half of the protest that would have gone there from out of Montreal, okay? They didn't attend because that wasn't the thing, right? And so it was very upsetting. They completely hijacked it, and money went missing. I can't recall the exact amount of money, but money went missing.
So a lot of money was donated, and some of it
went
missing.
Yeah, it went missing. And fuel cards, for something about fuel cards. And when they finally came back, there was a family that had reached out to me, and I put them on air that night. And as I put them on air and we were explaining the things that happened to them, what was his name? Got onto the live. Right off the top of my head now. What was his name? Oh, now it'll come to me. Anyway, he got on air, and he, at first, when he came on, he was saying how deflated he was trying to deflate and everything because a big week had happened and everything. And I did a video on this. And then the camera, after a few minutes of talking to him, all of a sudden the camera got turned around, and there is Pat King and the rest of them, all at what is his name? He's not into Mark Friesen. Mark Friesen.
Mark Friesen.
Okay, Mark Friesen. We started off with Mark Friesen, and then the camera got turned around, and there is Pat King and the rest of them all having a great time at Mark Friesen's house. Okay. And, I mean, to begin with, it was Mark Friesen saying, well, I'm here to relax. I'm here at home relaxing. He didn't say who was at his house. This was kind of sprung on the video. Okay. And it really became evident that, oh, wow, this was really quite something.
And so this is back in like 2019 during the first
Yeah.
convoy. So you've got a lot of the same faces in 2019 that then reemerged later through
Yeah.
this other convoy in 2022.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But
Mhm.
there was a few changes. Okay. The faces kind of changed, but they still were related. Okay. Glenn Carrott knew Tamara Lynch. Okay. And I believe knew Chris Barber. They were connected to political people. And Tamara Lynch was connected to the Maverick Party and some other parties that were out of Alberta that I learned after the fact. Okay. So there was a little bit of a political thing going on here with this
And
thing. This
and to just actually making a just to I'm tongue tied. Just
I
to
know it
make
gets that way. I know.
just make an important point that will come back because it's important for later. One of the groups that Tamara Litch was involved with had been under investigation, and there were issues with death threats made on social media against the prime minister. And that political group, she then had to kind of rebrand it and sort of push it away and distance herself from that a little bit because she was involved with that. And so I'll let you continue, but that's
A
just an
lot of people
important
didn't know
note.
that.
Yeah, a lot of people are not aware, but the government's certainly aware of it and
Yeah.
connected directly to her,
A lot of
just by
people at
name.
that
Not
time
that she
didn't
did
know it.
anything illegal necessarily at the time, but she was on the government's radar already
Yeah.
at that point.
But a lot of people didn't know that at the time. Here
Yeah.
she comes out of the woodwork. And I really didn't know who she was. Okay. But before that convoy even got or went to Ottawa, okay, I contacted Pat King. I contacted Chris Barber. I contacted a few of them to get Peter Turner there. Okay. Because I knew the momentum of this whole thing was going to be huge.
So
Okay. I
let's
mean,
explain again who Peter Turner is. And
sure.
now we're talking about 2022, the new convoy, the
Right.
Freedom Convoy, the big one
The big one. Yeah.
that happened during the pandemic,
Yeah.
which you became involved with because you had a following on social media and
Mhm.
you were asked to help promote it
No,
using
I took it
your
upon
voice.
myself.
Okay.
I took it upon myself because at first I didn't want to do it. Okay.
Mhm.
But something inside me said, I got to do it. Okay. So I then contacted these individuals and I said, okay, if I do it, then I want Peter Turner there.
And
Okay. I want Peter
explain who
Turner.
Peter Turner is and what he does.
Okay. Peter Turner is a lobbyist. He's a political lobbyist. He is the trucker's voice. Okay. He is involved with trucking and the truckers. He does a lot of lobbying for the truckers. He knows all the stuff ins and outs of the trucking industry.
Right.
Okay. Now he already had an inside track to government people. Okay, like Pierre Poilievre. Okay, he had an inside track to important people.
And
Okay,
specifically, I guess his area of expertise is protests, or
yeah,
strikes,
yeah,
helping union
that's
people
right.
stay on the right side of the
Yeah,
law
this wasn't going to be his first rodeo.
during strikes so
Okay,
that you don't get arrested, so that he helps facilitate and set up meetings to get productive outcomes,
yeah,
to actually set up negotiations so that you
yeah,
get what you want
that's
when
what
you
he does.
so that you follow the proper channels, stay
Yeah,
inside the law so nobody ends up in jail, so that nobody ends up with lawsuits, so that nobody ends up beaten
exactly.
in the streets. Um, and in the end, you go to the table, you
Hmm.
get some sort of negotiating going on, and you get an agreement of some kind of
Yeah,
settlement, right?
yeah,
That's
that's
what
right.
he's an expert at, and he has
That's his expertise.
and he had the political connections to make those meetings happen. And what
Exactly.
happened with Peter Turner?
So when the convoy rolled out and they got to Ottawa, Peter Turner met with Tamara Lynch and with Pat King at the truck stop, okay, at Empire. And Peter Turner, like Peter Turner, I know Peter Turner, I've known him for a while. He'll get in there, he'll explain himself, he'll tell him who he is and everything. Pat King was aware also of who Peter Turner was because I talked to him ahead of time. And they basically told Peter Turner, no, we don't need your services. We don't need anything to do with you. Okay. So at that point in time, Peter Turner's hands are tied. Okay. He cannot do shit. Okay. Unless he's got the support of what he's doing. Okay. Otherwise, he's going to look like an idiot. And Peter Turner is no idiot. Okay. He knows exactly what he's doing. So when they did that, there was nothing Peter Turner could do. Okay.
Yeah.
So he had to take a back seat just like me.
So this is a guy who has like helped set up negotiations for countless strikes and protests with government, with the leaders of big corporations, and he's got the contacts. And so he's saying, okay, you're on your way to this big protest in Ottawa. You've got this convoy going on. I'm here to help. No charge, right? He said no.
That's right.
No
He's got to do it for free.
For free, because
and that's a lot of work. Okay.
Right.
He offered his services for free.
And they did not, and if I'm getting this right, they didn't want him involved.
No, nothing to do with him. They flatly turned their backs on him, and they knew about him before they got there because they must have known. I talked to Chris Barber, and Chris Barber was in direct contact with Tamara Lynch, okay, was in direct contact with Pat King, and I was in contact with Pat King and Chris Barber. So they knew who Peter Turner was, okay? They had his phone number. I gave it to him, okay, and told him who Peter Turner was. So they knew who he was, all right? Yeah. And when he introduced himself at Empire and talked to Tamara Lynch face to face, she flatly turned him down and said, we don't want nothing to do with you, okay? So that was strange to begin with. That was the first thing that I felt was out of this world, okay? Like really completely off the wall.
Especially when they were reaching out, trying to get as much help from as many people as they possibly could to make it as big as they possibly could. And they were looking for people to help with, sort of in, I guess, organizational and administrative roles, because it was turning into this huge protest, right? That needed to be managed.
And it was biggest. It was one of the biggest. It was one of the biggest protests that had ever been put together.
Yeah.
And we had the hearts and minds of all Canadians in this. Okay. That's why it was so important to get it done right. Okay. And not like the first convoy where it went off the rails. This one had to be done perfect because there was so much involved with this. Okay. I mean, we had care homes where elderly people were being ripped apart from their loved ones. Okay. And that was the one big thing to me that was really upsetting. Okay. When I was seeing footage of stuff like that. Okay.
Yep.
And families were being ripped apart.
Yes.
And the whole medical system was turned up on its ear.
Yeah.
Okay. It was horrendous. It was absolutely horrendous. Yes. And we knew also there was evidence coming out about the jabs at that time as well.
Yeah, and we have to be careful because we're on YouTube, so just so we don't get banned.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. But we knew that was not a good thing. Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of medical evidence was coming out about that, and it was not good. Okay. So there was a lot of controversy about the whole program that the government put out to the public. Okay. Plus the narrative brainwashing that CBC was doing every single day. It was crazy. It was absolutely not Canadian. It was absolutely something off the wall.
Right. So we know all this, and the people here are, you know,
But this is what
more than
the big
familiar.
thing
But
was.
yeah, and I
This is
told
why
right
this is why all Canadians got onto this.
that right.
Okay, we
Totally, and
wanted something to
that's
happen.
why the vast majority of people went to the protest was for those
Exactly.
reasons. Right.
Exactly. So when that took place with them turning their back on Peter Turner,
Mhm.
this turned on a lot of red flags for me.
Yeah.
Okay, and so then all we could do now was watch everything unfold, and it was unbelievable as we watched every day all this stuff happening, and the speeches and the doctors that came out, and they invited them to the table, and on and on and on it went. Okay,
Mhm.
but there was no major meetings with any politicians. Okay, there
Right.
was no performance. Okay, if you want to call it that, on behalf of the leadership of the convoy, there was no positive direction. It
So
became
let's just
go ahead.
rewind a little bit again.
Sure.
So, I mean, because we're now into the actual protest happening, but even as the convoy was rolling, Peter Turner's telling them, if I remember right, from your discussion with him, he warned them. He said, if you do this the
Mhm,
way that you're doing it, he told
mhm.
them you will be going to jail. Is that
That's right.
correct?
That's
So
right.
they knew
They knew. Yeah,
in
and
advance.
they tried to pull that off in the close to the end because they didn't know how to shut down the convoy. So
Mhm.
they thought that by becoming a martyr of some kind, that was going to scare people to go home. But that wasn't going to happen. That
Well,
was
that
not.
okay. So let's again before we get too far ahead of ourselves.
Sure. Sure.
So, and then as this convoy is rolling and as they're on their way, what did we see happen with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms and lawyer Keith Wilson? How did they become part of all of this as you remember it?
Okay. Well, what happened was the convoy first got to Ottawa, but they weren't there. The lawyers weren't there at that time. What happened was they got in, and it was after they had talked to Peter,
Mhm.
and they found out in so many ways that they were way over their head. Okay. So right away, the lawyers came into it, and they booked a flight from Alberta to Ottawa, and along that flight, they picked up the accountant out of I believe Medicine Hat, and he joined that whole band. Okay,
Mhm.
so the accountant and all these lawyers flew into Ottawa to find out it was a mess. Okay, what was on the table was a bit of a mess. Okay, because they didn't have Freedom Corp put together. They didn't have. I mean, they had the Gippsland Go thing, um, trying to figure out what to do. Okay, because they didn't have the proper paperwork
So you've
done.
got these lawyers who work for this political activist group, which is really like it's a legal advocacy group, but they get involved in all these political issues.
JCCF or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, the
Yeah,
Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms.
right.
They they get in they have that they're definitely involved with the oil industry. They've had the main lawyers are John Carpay, who is sort
Hmm.
of out in front, and but mostly Keith Wilson. And so Keith
Hmm.
Wilson from the JCCF, who's you're seeing on Rebel News all the time
Hmm.
now, okay? And he flies out there and gets out in front of this convoy.
Yeah.
And it was Keith Wilson
Hmm.
who was instrumental in making sure that Tamara Litch was out in front of that convoy as the
That's right.
face of the convoy. He sort of handpicked her to
Yeah.
be the face of the convoy.
Well, they went around.
Yep.
Yeah, they started going around to all the groups around Ottawa, and they told everybody, like the road captains, they were telling all the road captains to direct all communications through them and only them.
Right.
Okay, that they become the center of everything. Okay,
Yes.
so this was the beginning of them putting together. it. I'm the center of this. Okay,
And by
kind of thing.
putting
They're the
themselves at the
leaders.
center of it, they
Right.
then set up this corporation,
Right.
which
Right.
in short form, they call it
Freedom Corp.
Freedom Corp. There's a much
Right.
longer name for it, but they call it Freedom Corp.
Right.
Keith, and it's a separate entity from the JCCF, but it is
Right.
Keith Wilson and a few other people that
Right.
put this thing together.
Yeah.
And
So that they could get the funds.
right.
You see?
And
But here's another thing.
and who was responsible and at the front of the fundraising? Tamara
Well,
Lynch.
that was Tamara Lynch.
Yeah.
Okay. She set herself up as that. Okay. Now, don't forget, it was Bridget
Belton.
Belton that originally started this. Okay.
Mhm.
But it was Tamara Lynch that came in about, I don't know, 5 or 6 days or so many days after the fact, and come up with the fundraising aspect of it to do that. So she was the one that set all that up, okay, with Gibson Go and everything else. But she didn't do it properly, okay? She had no idea that it was going to become what it became, right? So by the time they got to Ottawa, they had all this money in the kitty, okay, and no paperwork to back it up. No, you know what I mean? No legitimacy to it, okay?
Yeah.
So then they called the lawyers out, and also they called the accountant, okay? And so they got there and they had to straighten out all this stuff, okay? One of the fundraisers was one of the accounts that was going on was with the Toronto Dominion Bank, okay? Now, the Toronto Dominion Bank was reaching out to Tamara Lynch, I don't know how many times, but she refused to get back to the bank, okay? She wouldn't call the bank or tell them nothing. She just, like, lost in her head or whatever it was. So finally, the bank turned around and said, that's it. So they shut that down and I believe sent the money back to the donors or something, okay? That's how bad that one got, okay? But the accountant, by the time he got there and found out all this, what she had done, you know, it was a mess. It was a complete mess. Okay. So anyway, so then it got to where the government had shut down or had talked to Gibson Go and convinced them to shut down the account and send the money back. So they started another account with
Well, it started with GoFundMe, then it went to Give.
Yeah, GoFundMe, and then it was Gibson Go.
Right.
I believe. That's what it was. It was GoFundMe, and the government talked to them.
Yep.
And they screwed with that one, and then it was Gibson Go. Okay.
Yeah.
So then the money started coming through Gibson Go.
And so I think it's important to note that, you know, and just to clarify kind of what's just going on here.
Yeah. So basically,
what we have is we've got a convoy rolling, the biggest protest probably, well, in Canadian history,
ever in Canadian
by
history.
far, right?
And the money was pouring in.
Money's just pouring in at rates that are like
20 million.
Unprecedented amounts of
big
money in such a short period of time, which in itself is a little, you know, raises some red flags. And then you get these lawyers who are really political activists, who have been involved with separatist movements out in Western Canada. And then they come out here and they put themselves right out in front of the convoy, set up a corporation with their handpicked their handpicked leader to represent the convoy, even though it's not the woman who really started the convoy, but they put some key people in place to represent the convoy.
Well, they pushed her aside.
Right. They pushed Bridget aside. They put Tamara and they put their people in front, and then they were cast this net so that they could capture all of the money coming in and pump it into Freedom Corp, which they control.
Is
that correct?
That's basically what happened.
Okay.
Now the one thing,
and I should also point out, just as a very important point of reference.
Sure.
Later, when the information on that donor list was released, what we found out through the release of that information was that, do you know how much of that money came from the United States?
They there was a release on that. They said it wasn't. They tried to make it a thing.
It was 56%, Ruddi.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know that.
56% of the money that was pumped into that fund came from the United States,
Wow.
which is
Wow, that's
also
interesting.
bizarre, right?
Yeah.
For a
Yeah, that is
Canadian
bizarre.
protest to generate that level of funding, like that's almost 60%. That's 56% from the United States for
Wow,
a
because
Canadian
at the
protest,
time,
a Canadian political protest. We lost your feed there. There you go. You're back.
yeah, at the time they had put that question in front of CSIS or something,
Yep.
or in front of one of the government agencies, anyway.
Mhm.
And they said it wasn't a big thing, that it wasn't a political thing, or something to that effect.
Well, clearly
I
we've
don't know.
got foreign money flowing in there, and
Yeah.
it's an important point to note. So the politics is running all through this thing. We're being told, that this is a protest against the mandates, that the truckers just want the mandates to end. And we'll come back to that, and I'll show why even that claim was deceptive. But anyway, so we've got this legal group, JCCF, a political advocacy group that already has some ties to US funding through organizations like the Atlas Network, does all this work for the oil and gas industry, which is directly tied to what's going on in Alberta. They have direct ties, these lawyers, including especially Keith Wilson, to the Alberta separatist movement, which is also present in the first convoy. And now they've cast this net. They scoop up all the money. They put this lady, Tamara Litch, out in front, who has direct ties to the separatist movement in Alberta, who is already on the radar for the federal government. And they're putting this person out in front as somebody that they want to represent this protest against mandates, who already has, in the eyes of the government, a political agenda. So this is politically charged from the very beginning.
Oh, yeah, big time.
Right. And then the
Big
ordinary Canadians who are there thinking they're just protesting because of the mandates. Right. They're not aware of any of this. Even you're not aware of
not at the time.
Politics behind all of this.
Not at the time. I didn't know.
Right. So please.
What bothered me, okay, that kicked off my series, was they were coming to court now. Okay, Tamara Lynch and Chris Barber and Pat King. And everybody's trying to call them heroes. Okay.
Yeah.
But I knew they weren't heroes because of the behind the scenes thing that I already had been in contact with regarding Peter Turner.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I started the series, then this started to bring out a lot of other aspects of all this shenanigan stuff. Okay.
And one of the most important aspects of this that you have touched on here is that the JCCF, which is a team of lawyers, basically, that deal with political issues, they were going around the convoy telling all these truckers, hey, if you're caught up in anything illegal here, any legal issues, if you're sued, if they charge with anything, we will represent you pro bono. They're also telling the public, you can donate, keep on donating, donate this whole thing, because you're donating to a fund that will be used to provide legal protection, legal representation for the truckers. And in total, there were over 300 truckers there who were protesting, many of whom did end up with legal bills on their hands. Some of them very substantial, in the tens of thousands and even more of dollars. And how many? Do you know how many actually have received pro bono representation from the JCCF? About 30 in total.
Oh, 30 of them.
About 30, but that's
my understanding was hardly any of them.
It's not. That may even be a high number.
I think that's a high number, because not very many.
Because basically you've got Tamara Litch, Chris Barber, and who else? even Pat King did not get
No,
representation.
Pat
from the
King did his
JCCF.
own funding. He was not represented by JCCF.
Yeah.
I don't know of any other truckers that got anything.
Yeah, and I can check that.
So I would double check on that, because to my knowledge, the only ones that got any funding was Tamara Lynch and Chris Barber. Okay. Other than that, that's all I know of. Right. So, I mean, they threw a lot of people under the bus, is what they did, with a lot of misinformation, from my knowledge. Okay. From my understanding of
Yeah.
what the end result was. And, it was horrendous. What ended up happening in the end was just horrendous. I mean, it was terrible. So, I mean, like in the end, there was another fundraiser going on, and that fundraiser put $500 in envelopes, and they met at a hotel, and they took those envelopes, and they were told to get the license plate and the name of the driver, and gave them the envelope, which contained about $500.
Mhm.
So for all their trouble, to my knowledge, all those truckers got was $500 each, to my knowledge. Okay.
Yeah.
And they had a hell of a time getting diesel. That was another thing. Some drivers were out there just screaming for diesel, and they were living in their trucks, and it was horrendous trying to get diesel to them. So it was a bit of a clusterfuck in a way. But they managed to pull it off. It was a struggle between getting resources to the drivers and the cops trying to do what they were doing, like stealing gas, diesel, and the rest of it. The cops were doing a dirty, underhanded thing before the hammer came down. They were screwing with the diesel and stuff like that. And these guys are living in their trucks. They're trying to freeze these guys out of their trucks. They were trying to make these guys realize they're going one way or another. Okay.
Okay, so let's take a look. I need to take a short break. We're going
Sure.
to come back and continue with this on the other side. And I did check into that, and it's between 30 and 50. But I think that's because a lot of these people were also involved in that class action lawsuit, which the JCCF is involved with. But even there, they're not representing everybody involved or named
Right.
in that class action lawsuit from the citizens group, which is politically charged as well. But as far as like individual charges, yeah, I think it's much less than even the 30. So we will come back and continue with this on the other side. Stay with us. Ruddi Bruce, Canadian trucker and freedom fighter, exposing some of the deceptions behind the Canadian Freedom Convoy, the hidden agenda that a handful of powerful people had that have led us to this point in Canadian history where the entire country might end up flying apart. Stay with us.
Maverick News. The world is watching.
Yeah, I don't.
We are back with Ruddi Bruce,
Okay.
Canadian trucker and
Okay.
freedom fighter. And he's on a phone call, I guess.
No, I know I'm off.
Okay.
I'm off now. Good, go.
Okay. All right. So let's pick up where we left off. So the protest is now underway. We have the lawyers out in front, specifically and most prominently Keith Wilson, who is not only providing legal advice, but also direction. We know that they've cast this net. They've captured the funds, over $20 million coming in. They've put their people in place to become the face of the convoy, pushing the original the mother of the convoy, Bridget Belton, to the side, and some of the other key people who were originally involved in getting the thing rolling, this particular convoy. And so now they're basically in control, right?
Oh yeah, from top to bottom.
Okay.
So now, just before the hammer comes down, the truckers are in their trucks, and they're struggling to get diesel to
And
their trucks.
by saying the hammer comes down, you're talking about we're now at the point near the end of the convoy. Like this is about 3 weeks later, because the convoy was
Just
there
about.
almost a month. Yeah, and
Yeah,
they're
just about.
now we're receiving warnings from the municipality, from the
The
government,
cops.
from the cops, the police chiefs holding news conferences saying
Oh yeah,
you must leave now or you will be arrested, making
that's
it
right.
very clear. We have police out in the streets handing out flyers, leaflets telling everybody if you have to leave, this is
Mhm.
all over. If you don't leave now, you're going to be arrested. And we have police and riot gear beginning to
Yeah.
assemble.
And now
Right,
the other thing too is the government is calling this now an occupation,
right,
not a protest.
right.
Okay. There has now at this time there hadn't been any sit downs with any politicians. Okay.
Right,
They
right.
were in the hotel doing their lives.
Yep.
Okay. And with the doctors and stuff. And they at this point in time, they had no sit downs with any politicians. Okay. At this time. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Now, yeah.
now when the government is in session, they're spewing all the lies they can spew. Okay. Calling it an occupation, calling it this, calling it that, and really twisting the whole thing from what it was. And Trudeau, he's got no balls. Okay. Trudeau was the worst politician ever to oversee this as a politician. Okay.
Mhm.
This guy knew why they were there. Okay. He had no balls. Okay. I don't speak highly of Trudeau in his actions at all.
Mhm.
Okay. Because this was not a protest where there was vandalism and horrendous things happening. All you had was a bunch of peaceful protesters outside doing speeches and calling the mandates horrendous, etc.
Mhm.
And this guy, this politician, if you want to call him a politician, had no balls. Okay, absolutely
Right.
no.
Except what we also know is that more than one thing can be true at the same time. And
Yeah,
we also know that Peter Turner had told these people, if you do it the way you're going to do it, you're going to end up in jail. We also
exactly.
know that Peter Turner also said to you, if I'm not mistaken, he said that they had no desire, they did not go there
No,
to meet with anybody.
no,
And so it's not really all on Trudeau because
no. It's
they didn't really want to
I
meet with
say
Trudeau, right?
I say Trudeau could have done a little intervening.
He
Okay,
could have.
he's a
Yes, I agree with
politician.
you
You know what
100%.
I mean?
I'm right
He's
there
the
with you.
prime minister of Canada,
Yep.
supposed to be representing all of Canadians.
Right.
Okay, us
Yep.
truckers are Canadians.
Yep.
Okay, and we are the backbone of this country.
Yep.
Okay, so he had, like I said, he had no. I mean, sure, the people
He
that
could have
were
right.
the
He could have
leaders of the
initiated meetings.
convoy didn't
He
do a
could have
proper job.
he could have walked out
Yeah,
outside at any point and just said, "Hey, let's have a chat."
let's have a sit down.
He could
Okay,
have done that.
he could have, but he never did.
But
Yeah,
these
yeah,
people, this little group of people who are now
right,
in control, they're
right.
there that they're not. Peter Turner said, they weren't really there uh,
Yeah,
to get to a resolution. They didn't want a
yeah,
solution. He said
yeah.
they didn't want a solution to anything. Isn't that
That's
what he
right.
said?
Well,
Right,
that's true, but they also brought a big tractor trailer that was specifically put out in front of Parliament
right. That
that
said
said
what?
"fuck Trudeau."
Of course.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that didn't look good too. You know
No,
what I mean?
that's not a great
The
way to enter
message
into
was right in
negotiations.
front.
And didn't Peter Turner tell them that wasn't wise?
That wasn't good.
Yeah,
Okay.
he told them.
Yeah, he told him that was not a good move. I mean, so
If you want to
I
meet,
mean, yeah, So I mean, it
especially
really kind of
especially when you
offset.
think especially
Yeah,
when you think that the person they chose to put out in front of the convoy was associated with a group that had previously been identified or
yeah,
had investigated because they'd made death threats against
yeah.
the prime minister. So then the
There you go.
person leading the whole parade,
Yeah, yeah.
right,
So it
is
didn't look
there with
good.
a truck that
It,
says F Trudeau that they park right in
yeah,
front of his office. So
it didn't
is
look good.
would if let me ask you something, Rudy. If
Sure,
somebody
sure.
threatened to kill you,
Mm.
right? And a group, and then they pulled up in front of your office that said F Rudy Bruce with a big sign on the side.
Yeah,
Would you
it
would you
would be
just
a it would be
would
a
you just
hard take.
walk outside
Yeah, no, you couldn't
into
do that.
a big group of people that some might
Yeah, no,
describe as a mob, but
no, I
a
guess you
great
couldn't
big
do that.
group
But
of
he could have
angry
sent.
people?
Yeah, he could have sent a message. Okay, he didn't have to walk
Yes,
out there.
I think they were sending him a
You know.
message,
Oh yeah, definitely. Oh, I
right?
gotta agree with that. I mean, there's no
Right?
doubt about it. I mean,
Just to be
there
fair,
was this tension
to
between the two.
say the least, yes,
There was no doubt about that.
yeah,
Okay, there was a tension between the two. But like I said, this guy is supposed to be acting as prime minister of the
of course,
country. Okay,
he
so he
failed.
should have taken some initiative,
Should have
but he
taken the
never did.
initiative instead of taking the bait. That's what he
Exactly.
should have done.
So yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's where I say he faltered. But anyway, so now before the hammer comes down, you've got these truckers that are staying in their trucks and they're struggling with fuel.
Yeah.
Okay. And these cops are doing an underhanded, dirty job, okay, of stealing fuel and literally stealing fuel. It's not their fuel. They never
Right.
paid for it.
Yeah. I mean,
They
we're
were
aware of all
stealing
that. Yeah.
fuel.
It was 100%. We showed it all right here live. We showed
They
all
were
that stuff
stealing
going
fuel.
on.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was an
Yeah.
underhanded, dirty
Confiscating it.
trick.
Yep.
Okay.
Confiscating the fuel. Yep.
And
And so,
then the leadership of this thing, seeing that the hammer was coming, okay,
right.
they knew it was coming, okay.
Mhm.
So I mean, there was evidence of 3 UN planes that had touched down, and there was a massive
Well,
gathering of cops.
regardless of who the
Right?
police were in those uniforms,
Yeah.
you could see that they were assembling riot police,
Oh yeah,
right?
that's what was happening. They were
It was
assembling
happening, and
big time.
the people were being warned. And
Yep.
how did Keith Wilson respond? What did he do?
He, well, this was what got me. Okay, Keith Wilson. Now here's a lawyer. Okay, he knows that when they pull out the Emergencies Act, your citizen rights are gone.
Mhm.
Okay, you're now under an Emergencies Act.
It's
Okay, this is
basically
the
a form
same
of
as war.
martial law because that's
Exactly.
the new
Exactly.
word, the new title for what was the War Measures
Exactly.
Act. Yeah, which is
Exactly.
exactly what was used during the FLQ crisis.
Right.
Not
And
not
what does this guy do? He puts out a message, and Chris Barber was in the room, I believe, at the time,
yeah.
and they
Was.
put out a message calling for more people around the surrounding area
Well,
to
across
come in and
Canada,
get involved in
they
the
called on
protest.
all Canadians.
Yeah,
Keith Wilson
yeah,
said, put out a message to the country
yeah,
encouraging more people to come,
to come down.
even as the leaflets were being handed out, telling people you must leave now or you're going to be arrested, or maybe worse, as they
Yeah,
were assembling riot police. Which
that's right.
if you know anything about anything, and you've
Yeah,
ever watched a newscast in your life, and you've seen protests at economic summits and anything involving world leaders or on any capital in any capital city around the world, when you get riot police standing up against a group of protesters, generally what happens is the people get the crap kicked out of them if they don't leave,
exactly. So really, what was his motive
right?
for doing and saying what he said?
Yes,
You
therein
know,
lies the
was
rub.
it
Yeah.
money? I mean, like when you get a bunch of people charged, he's got a title of a lawyer.
Mhm.
It's like an ambulance chaser. Okay, this guy was promoting business.
Yes, I guess he was, wasn't he? There are going
Is
to be a
what strikes
lot
me.
of lawsuits in there.
Is what strikes me. This guy's an ambulance chaser, and he was out there promoting business.
In a
Okay,
way.
he didn't want it to end. Okay,
Yeah.
he's seen the dollar signs, and holy crap, let's keep her going.
Mhm.
Let's not end it now. Okay, I mean, he's scratching his head. Well, let's bring them all, bring everybody.
Except it's not just the money, is it, Ruddi? Because we see these political ties, and we've seen from the very beginning, even with the first convoy, the connections to the separatist movements in Alberta. We've seen direct affiliation with some of these people out in front of the convoy with separatist activist groups and political parties, right? We're seeing Keith Wilson out in front, not just providing legal advice, but actually, I'd say being involved in the protest, not just providing legal direction, but making public statements on social media like any of the other protesters. And who has Keith Wilson become involved with? Well, he's become involved with the separatist movement out in Western Canada, always has been, from my estimation. And who is on social media making the rounds and has been through the election and even today? Who's one of the most prominent figures on social media talking about Alberta separatism?
Now get this. Get this.
Yeah. So who is it?
This guy is in tight with Ezra Levant. Okay,
of Rebel News. Yep.
Of Rebel News. Now, if you look into history of Canada, the Statue of Westminster, the whatever you call it, okay, the
I don't want to get into all of that.
I'm not. I'll just say one thing. I'll just say one thing about it. Every province has a right to their sovereignty and has a right to, like Danielle Smith, what Danielle Smith is doing. Every province has the same right to do that. Now, Keith Wilson, he's coming out there and he's really punching that. Okay.
Yes, he is.
He's out there in the forefront, wanting to say, like this, this is a real thing. This is a real. Well, anybody that's done any history knows that we all stand to be able to do that. Okay. I mean, it's in the book. Okay. So, but he's right out there, like he's a real knowledgeable guy.
That's why you got, and I mean, so now we're getting into the nitty gritty of the politics.
Yeah.
Okay. So if I can maybe assist here a little bit.
Sure.
The backstory that people are not aware of is that out in Alberta, what really has been happening leading up to all of this and subsequent to it is the takeover, basically, of the UCP, the United Conservative Party, of the separatist movement in Alberta. And to really understand this, you need to look at what's been going on out there with separatist groups like the Alberta Prosperity Project, Chris Scott, Take Back Alberta. I believe that's
they've been doing this for a while.
Yes, for years.
They even before the convoy. Yeah.
Long before the convoy.
Yeah.
I just spoke to, frankly, and I'll tell you this, I had a conversation with a source who has to remain nameless today for now. Maybe I'll be able to reveal the source later. But this source, directly involved heavily from the very beginning of everything going on, he said that the truth of the matter is this whole thing was planned long in advance, many, many months, maybe even years in advance. This convoy had been planned.
Well, it seems like that. Okay.
Oh, it was. He told me. He told me the whole thing.
And when it kicked off and everything, it was so slick.
I've got it.
It was so slick.
I got it.
You know what I mean? It was so slick when, Bridget sparked it. Okay.
Yes, she did. Because more than one thing, Ruddi, can be true at the same time. The planning for a lot of this had been taking place for years in advance.
That's right.
And
they took advantage of it.
Bridget, for whatever reason, got it in her head to have a convoy. Yeah. She initiated on her end as well. So
we kind of all did in a way.
Right. And
once we sparked, that was it.
Yeah.
Once we saw a spark, we never imagined, okay,
they converged. These things came
that this
together.
Political interference would happen. We never imagined that. Okay.
Political interference.
That we were doing
key phrase. Yes.
We thought we were doing the right thing. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's why I phoned who I phoned and said, get Peter Turner in there, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Because we were thinking we were doing the right thing. Little did we know that behind the scenes, another group was like vultures.
Right.
Okay. And they were sitting on the fence post just waiting for this kind of thing to happen.
Because it's very disruptive and it's an opportunity to cast,
Bingo.
um,
And they seen
to
it coming.
discredit government, to embarrass the government, to cause problems, to
Yeah.
just be very disruptive, which is why
Yeah.
Peter Turner said these people weren't going there for any kind of a solution to the mandates. They were just
Yeah.
going there to cause trouble.
Yeah, exactly. And
That's what he
that's really
said.
what they did. Okay.
Mhm.
But I mean they did it on a level, okay, that disrupted the entire movement.
The whole
Okay.
country.
The whole country, if you want to call it that. They disrupted it to a point of where they froze everybody into thinking, well, if I come out and protest tomorrow, what's going to happen to me? I
Yep.
mean, am I going to get arrested and do 10 years for mischief?
Except, yes, because I would submit this to you, Rudy.
Yeah.
Do you think that if someone goes there, like if someone represents an actual existential threat to the country and is known to the government and the authorities as being someone who is actively working to split the country up,
Mhm.
right? Would
Mhm.
you not say that that might be an act of treason?
Not today.
Do you know what
Okay.
happened? You know what happened? You know,
I would say not
see,
today.
that's an important point because, if you are, let me ask you this.
Mhm.
What do you think would happen if, say, Montana or Michigan
Mhm.
had people in the United States talking the way that the separatists in Alberta are talking? What do you think would happen to them on the US side? How would the federal government respond to that?
Well, you have to take into account the events that are leading up to that
Nope.
event.
No, you don't.
Okay.
It's quite clear.
And I'm going to say this. Why? I'll say that why I say that. Because in the last 9 years, okay, with having Trudeau in office and after the scandals, okay,
Regardless, Rudy,
after the scandals, scandal after scandal, this is not a government that's representing the people anymore.
let me get to my point.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I'll say this. These people who are talking about separatism,
Hmm.
they're lucky they're in Canada and not the United States. Because if you're talking like that in the United States about seceding from the Union,
Hmm.
you're going to jail, man, because the US Constitution does not provide a mechanism for states to secede. There's a Supreme Court case, Texas versus White, 1869, and it established that the Union is indissoluble and that
Hmm.
states cannot unilaterally secede. Secession would require either a constitutional amendment on the consent of the federal government and other states, and those things are highly unlikely to happen. So,
But Canada's different.
yes, Canada certainly is different, isn't it? The point is, if you talk about leaving the United States as a state, and if you're behind a movement to do that,
Mhm.
that is an act of treason.
Mhm.
You're going to jail, man, and
Mhm.
for a hell of a long time because
Because
that
of
because
their
you're a traitor.
democracy.
No,
Yeah, but they have a democracy.
no, they
Okay.
don't. That's
Or a
quite the point.
republic or
It's
whatever they
no,
have.
it's not. That's not. No, they've got an overreaching constitution that says once you're in, you're in. You ain't leaving, and you don't
Okay.
have any say. That's it. There's no voice for the people with regard to separating or seceding from the union. But in Canada, because they're a country of conquest, and they
Okay.
rule through authority and even a degree of authoritarianism. In Canada, we've never been a country like that. We are a country of compromise, conciliation, not conquest. And so, as a result, in order to avoid a moment like 1776 or the Civil War, which is what our founders, Sir John A. Macdonald, wanted to avoid by creating the kind of confederation that we have a country of compromise where we've allowed provinces to retain a great degree of
Their
their
sovereignty.
sovereignty so
They
that we
retain their
so that
sovereignty.
so that we didn't have to go to war. There's a big difference between Canada and the United States in that
Yes.
regard. So if people say that we're very much the same, no, we're very, very
No,
different in the way that we
different. We're
approach
very
politics.
different.
It's the same
Yeah.
with First Nations. We've
Yeah.
approached First Nations relations in the same way. In the United States, not so much. That's why you got the genocide down there. The Canadians really are blamed for largely because people mix up their US and Canadian history, but we don't have that same legacy, that same stain to the same degree. Not that we're not guilty of a lot of problems and crimes in that regard, but no, Canada is a country of conciliation and compromise, not conquest. So as a result, even today, when you have people in Quebec talking about separatism, or you have people in Alberta talking about separatism, you know what happens to them? They get charged not with treason, they get charged with mischief. And then these people sit there and put themselves out there, Ruddi, as being victims, when in reality, because they say this is a charge that you would charge someone with for spray painting on a wall. When in reality, they're being charged with mischief because they want to destroy the country, because they're engaging in really a treasonous act.
Well,
Do you understand what I'm saying?
What they did in Ottawa was not so much a separatist thing. Okay. What they did in Ottawa was an occupational thing.
Right.
Okay. They sat there
because
in front of Parliament and really didn't do any production of why they were there.
Right.
Okay? They sat there and they disrupted the city for X amount of time.
And why would
that's where the mischief comes in.
That's where the mischief comes in. Because they're not going to come right out and say, we're here because we want to separate, we want to break the country up. They're not going to say that.
No, they didn't say
not
that.
out loud. Although, you know, the government, there were some people who were there actually saying it, which I can get into later, which is also why the government was upset and concerned. If you look at Norman Traversy or you look at James Bowder with his MOU, those were things that actually, you know, in writing were interpreted as being an existential.
Yeah, they were off the wall. That
nevertheless,
was
there were about 18 separate groups there, right? And those people were involved, and those are real things as well. So the government's looking at the big picture, So more than one thing can be true at the same time.
Exactly.
Right? So you can't make the excuse for those people.
No.
That, you know, it's a peaceful protest.
It looked like
it is
it
over
was
there, but not so much with that. And then so the government's looking at all of these things and trying to separate them.
Yeah.
And so the point that I'm making is, if, you know, people are sitting there saying that Canada is this big authoritarian monster, because they've charged some of these people with mischief, when if this had happened in the United States, some of them literally would have been going to jail for life.
Yeah, it's a different thing.
It's a
different laws.
Different laws. So in reality, Canada is a much more tolerant country. And even now, after we get to this point, what's going on? This is boiling over now out in Alberta because some people are making it so. They're accused today by some First Nations leaders of actually manufacturing a national unity crisis for, I would say, probably selfish and maybe even corrupt purposes, but I digress. So this is still ongoing. And even now, because we actually do have something that is an actual democracy here in Canada, we're still willing to give people in Alberta a voice and say, you want to have a referendum? There's a path forward to that if you really want to do it. And we're not going to throw you in jail for life for asking these questions. But man, it sure does create for a raucous ride here in Canada, doesn't it?
Well, after what we're not going to get into that part of it, but it is looking pretty serious. Okay.
Yeah. So let's backtrack
we're looking at something that is unbelievable.
As it absolutely is, and it's a tragedy. And this is breaking my heart what I'm seeing going on in our country right now. So let me just let's just backtrack a little bit. And again, these people, these core people, with these other motives, whatever they may be. And I think, as I said, the masks are coming off. So we're seeing that there's money, there's power, there's this desire to promote the separatism, right? These are all these elements wrapped up in this core group of people. You can see these elements there, plain as day now, right? And was there not actually at one point a meeting set up by someone?
A meeting to meet with politicians?
Yeah.
Yes, but it was canceled by Tamara Lynch and Chris. No, the lawyer guy. What's his name again?
Keith Wilson.
Keith Wilson. That was canceled. Okay,
So
that
they had
sit
a chance
down.
to meet. They had a chance for
That
a
they
sit
had a
down
chance, and it was
and
canceled.
canceled.
Okay, so that's where the occupation thing comes in. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's where the government in Parliament were starting to say this is an occupation.
Yep.
This is not a protest anymore.
Right.
Okay, we don't know how long these people are planning to sit here.
Right.
Okay, this is a disruption of the citizens of Ottawa.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
they had a responsibility to the citizens of Ottawa. I mean, sure, we have protests in Ottawa,
Yep.
but not like this.
Yep.
Not where you have 1,500 trucks sitting around the city with big signs on them saying "fuck Trudeau,"
Right.
and so on. Okay, this is a disruption. So, Trudeau with no balls does the next thing he can think of, and that is, well, I'm not going to go out and meet him. We're going to pull the Emergencies Act, and we're going to crush these guys, and all of Canada is going to see this.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless. I mean, you know what I mean? We're going to make these guys look like crap, okay, in his eyes, okay?
Well,
So
and let's
what he does.
right. So let's look at it again. More than one thing can be true at the same time. The vast majority of people there are peaceful protesters. The government sees that. So they're handing out these leaflets and they're saying, hey, peaceful protesters, it's time for you all to go because you're not just holding the line. Now you're crossing the line. We're warning you.
When she gets arrested, her statement is hold the line.
Right. Hold
like,
the
don't
line.
go anywhere.
Yep.
Don't go away.
Yep.
Hold the line.
Even though you're being told by law enforcement repeatedly, news conferences, flyers. Now you're actually seeing the riot police assemble, and you're being told you've crossed the line. It's time to leave. Please leave. The truckers are being told you got to get out of this red zone. You got to get these trucks out of here. It's time to go. You've been here over 3 weeks. It's time to go. And the Emergencies Act is invoked, which means everybody knows that you don't really have your rights to just stay there because this is now viewed as an occupation. Legally, it's now an occupation because the government says it's an occupation and because they've invoked the Emergencies Act. Because why? Because they see Keith Wilson, they see Tamara Litch, they see this true existential threat to the country represented by people fronting this protest who have direct ties to the separatist movement in Alberta, which represents an existential threat to the country.
Yeah. But what does Keith Wilson do?
What does he do?
He meets with the mayor in the last week of this. Okay. And he makes a little agreement with him that they're going to move X number of trucks from one point to another, not to be out of the red zone or go or shut down the car or anything. We're just going to move a few trucks, not shut down the protest. Okay. And they know the hammer's coming down on the other side of the street. Okay. They know Trudeau is mounting up a big offensive. So Keith Wilson goes and meets with the mayor, comes back with this statement that, if we move a few trucks, we're going to be okay. He doesn't send out any message at all. Okay. None of them do. Okay. About this hammer coming down. Now we're within days of this hammer coming down. And all he does is say, we reached an agreement and we're going to move a few trucks. That was not what was happening. Okay. The mayor could say whatever he wanted, could agree to whatever. Didn't matter. Okay. They knew Trudeau was going to pull it. Okay. He knew it. He didn't care what this agreement was going to be or whatever. He didn't care at that time. But Keith Wilson comes back out with that statement.
Well, he came out as you indicated, and I ran like the video. We've shown it here in the past. So Keith Wilson sends out this message across Canada as the flyers are being handed out again. He says, Canadians, if we want more of you to come.
Yeah, he wanted more.
please come and support the
Oh, yeah.
truckers, and encourages more people to come,
And more
even
money.
as right, and support these truckers and come to, and protest, even as people are being told by police, by government, you have to leave now. You have to
He
leave
was
now.
he
It's
was a
over.
he was
Even
a
as the Emergencies
two-faced
Act is invoked.
he was a two-faced guy. Okay.
Right.
He wasn't coming out with the truth. He was trying to keep it going.
Yep.
Okay. He didn't want it to end. He's seen them,
Yep.
excuse me, them dollars coming in.
And more than and then another element to it. What else did you say they wanted when the people were getting beaten as a result of this
They wanted the
advice?
optics. They wanted the optics of that.
A
Okay. They
photo op, you
wanted to
said,
let
right?
all of Canada know
Yeah.
that if you screw with the government, this is what's going to happen to you.
Well, you said that they wanted a photo op. Is that right?
That's what they were after.
Yeah.
Okay. A
And so what
great
did
big finish, a great
right?
big photo op to this is what happens to you if you come up against us, the government.
Well,
Okay.
the and so the protest. So now Keith Wilson has his photo op, and the protesters, the innocent people who are think that they're there protesting for the to end the mandates, but they're
Yeah.
really being manipulated in a way
Yeah.
by Keith
Exactly.
Wilson to saying, "You stay
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
come, hold the line, even though
Yeah.
you've
Hold
been
the
told
line.
you've crossed the line. You're now in an illegal occupation." He's still providing, well, essentially legal advice to the
Some
entire
legal advice.
population,
I
right?
wouldn't hire him for a lawyer, I'll tell you
Right.
that.
So
You
stay,
know?
and more people should come, he says.
Yeah.
And then during the Public Order Emergency Commission inquiry reviewing the use of the Emergencies Act, do you recall what Keith Wilson said and how he testified with regard to that, and why he
No, I
said
didn't.
why?
I don't recall that.
Oh, I do.
Oh.
He said that he never imagined that that there would be violence, even as police were assembling riot in riot gear were being assembled,
What do you think
even as
that
the
is?
barricades were being set up.
What do you think that's going? I mean, my God, when a riot
Well,
squad comes out, okay,
yeah,
now,
and
I've over
if he
10
didn't
years
think
I've done
it,
this,
yeah,
okay,
sure, yeah,
and I do not promote any kind of a protest where that is going to take place. If anything like that were to take place, then pack up your shit and let's go. Don't engage, okay? You're not going to win, okay? There's going to be no winners when it comes to confronting riot police. There's
right,
no winners, okay? I've seen how they operate. I know how they operate. It's nothing but a disaster, okay? We pack up, we go home, we fight for another day, okay?
yep,
That's it, okay? But what are these guys? What are these guys did? What they did was horrendous, okay? There was no need. With proper leadership, there was no need to even engage in that, okay?
yep,
Those people were so misled, okay?
yep.
But they thought they were doing the right thing because of the mixed messaging that was coming from the communications department, okay? And the leadership,
From Keith
okay?
Wilson.
Exactly. I mean, it was so mixed, okay?
Mm-hmm.
It was unbelievable, okay? They were right to the bitter end. They were telling them they had rights.
Is it would you say it was fair to say they used these innocent,
Yeah.
peaceful
Oh,
protesters who thought they were
definitely.
there protesting as
Definitely.
the mandates, that
Yeah.
they used these people as pawns or maybe even cannon fodder?
Exactly. I would have to say in both on yes on both because it was horrendous. What there was no messaging
Yeah.
whatsoever. I mean, other than a few, like Bridget was telling a few people, "Let's go." Okay, let's go. There was
Bridget
a
told
few
people to
people.
leave, didn't she? She
Yeah,
did.
there was
She told
Bridget
many
was
people
one
to
of them,
leave.
and there was a few others. But
Yeah.
because of all of this mixed messaging that was coming from
Mm-hmm.
Keith Wilson and so on, that they got disorganized. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
in the end, they because the hype was so up there. Okay,
Yep.
and it had been 3 weeks now, and they were in deep. Okay,
Yep.
a lot of those people
And
were now.
there's another element to this too, Rudy. And it just I found out about this today.
Mm,
Um, More than one thing can be true at the same time, because I know that a lot of the peaceful protesters were doing things like shoveling snow
Oh
off
yeah,
sidewalks,
they were
keeping
committed.
snow off the war monument, right? But
Yeah.
there was another element to that too. And you know what those shovels were also used for?
What?
To shovel um, snow into places to obstruct police. And
Oh,
as a result, even today, a protester was convicted on charges related to that. I just got the notes from court today about it. What,
wow.
there was somebody who had been shoveling snow, and you can see it actually there. As a result of this advice to stay and stand in opposition to the riot police coming, they were shoveling snow into big barriers to obstruct
Wow.
police. So as a result, they got charged for doing that. And today somebody convicted, and they're going to pay a penalty for that. And that's, because they were in their head convinced that they should be doing these things because they thought they
Mm.
were doing the right thing. In reality, what they were doing was very illegal. And now they're in a heap of trouble. And now they're going to pay the price. Convicted in court today as a result of that after a
Wow.
lengthy trial. I could look up the names and so forth, but the point is that, it's being made. So yeah, a lot of peaceful protesters, also some people who are misled, misguided, and as a result took steps and took actions that got them into a lot of trouble. And as you're saying here tonight, they were used, manipulated.
Yeah,
They're
they
the
were
ones paying
used.
the price. And where's Keith Wilson today? Was he representing this person in court?
I doubt it. I
No,
seriously doubt it.
no, not at all.
You know,
Left
these
high and dry.
guys, these guys were very good manipulators, I would have to say, because of a title of a lawyer, the title of being a lawyer. Okay.
Mhm.
So let this be a lesson in the future. Okay. When it comes to certain lawyers, I mean, I would really take their advice with a grain of salt.
Yep.
Okay. Really have to put your critical thinking cap on to get through it. Because this guy, okay, he was not there for the movement. Okay. He was there to fill his pockets and make a glorified name over himself. Okay. And he still does it today. Okay. With Ezra Levant. And,
Mhm.
if, I could get into the other, but I won't bother. But even on that, okay. But I mean, this guy is right in there like a flint, okay, ready to pounce on the next
And that's
agenda
and that is
thing.
how they've accessed the money and continue to try to access the money that is still in escrow. Some of it
Yeah,
has been released, and what's it been used for? Legal fees. And so as
exactly.
these cases wind through the courts, that money that is sitting in those funds, where does it go? It goes in to fund these legal defenses. Who are the lawyers that are brought to bear on that? They come from the JCCF. So even though
Yeah.
you have this separate entity set up over here to capture the money then is used to pay
Now,
for
let
the
me tell you
for the
this.
work being done by
Let me
those
tell you
same
this.
lawyers.
When
Yeah.
this was all put together, those people donated the money
Yep.
for the truckers,
Right.
not the lawyers.
Right.
Okay. This was donated money to facilitate the
Truckers.
truckers' needs of fuel and accommodation,
Hmm.
not lawyers. Okay. And what did
Yeah.
the truckers get out of this? Was not, you know,
Hmm.
it, they got the raw end of the deal. Okay. When it comes down to it. Okay. But
Uh-huh.
they're the real heroes in this event. Okay. Not Tamara Lynch, not Chris Barber.
Mhm.
Okay. Those are zeros. Okay.
Yeah.
Not these lawyers. They're zeros. Okay. The real heroes in this event of the convoy, Freedom Convoy 2022, were the protesters, the innocent protesters that
Hmm.
went there thinking they were going to make a difference because they were led there
Yeah.
by all this thing that was going on.
Yeah.
And they're the heroes, not
Yeah.
the guys at the top.
And the
Okay.
politics is running thick through all of this. And there's another element to this that people are just really didn't quite clue in on. And I've touched on this as well. There were some meetings that did take place between politicians and some of these
Mm.
people from the convoy, the leaders, this core group of people. And who those politicians were? They were conservative
Yes.
politicians, right?
Pierre Polyev, he was in there. He was
Right.
talking to them.
And do you remember
Yeah.
what happened to the leader of the Conservative Party as a result of the Freedom Convoy. What happened to Aaron O'Toole?
Oh, he got ousted.
Got ousted, right?
You
And
know,
that
he
was a
got
direct
ousted.
result. That was a direct result of the Freedom Convoy and the pressures that were
Yeah.
brought to bear against, against not just the government so much, but even the Conservative Party, because uh, there was this internal struggle that was taking place, this
Yeah.
friction between the two wings of the
Yeah.
Conservative Party. One wing wanted to sort of stay distanced from the convoy, and the other side, which was pro-Alberta, sympathetic to the separatist cause out there,
Yeah.
and the United Conservative Party of Alberta and Alberta Prosperity Project and Take Back Alberta and these other separatist movements, okay, out there, these activist groups, more sympathetic to that, drawing a lot of their base of support from those people. That wing of the Conservative Party, very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
They were instrumental. Andrew Scheer, Leslyn Lewis, some of the others, they were the ones behind the ousting of Peter O'Toole. And as a result of their actions and this internal revolt within the Conservative Party, it paved the way for a leadership convention and the installment of Pierre Poilievre, who also has his roots in Western Canada.
They definitely used this as a political tool.
Yeah.
I mean, the accusations that were being made in the House,
Yep.
unbelievable. I mean, just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Okay, like for example, they said hold the line. Okay, they turned that into some kind of a Nazi phrase. Okay, some kind of a Nazi thing, that it represented some kind of a Nazi thing.
Yeah, the Hong Kong thing. The Hong
You
Kong
know, I mean,
thing.
it was off the wall. It was so off the wall. Okay, and it always deflected.
Yep.
The real cause and the real reason why the convoy was there in the first place,
which was for the vast majority of the people, the mandates.
Exactly.
And the pandemic.
It deflected, and we couldn't get to that base.
Right.
Right. So it always deflected.
And unfortunately, the people who came for that reason, the whole darn thing fell apart.
Manipulated.
And you ended up, if I'm following you properly, it deteriorated.
Distorted.
Yeah, it was all distorted. That's a good word, distorted, in ways that were very difficult to understand, but are being exploited even now, because you ended up, because of this hidden agenda, you ended up having people beaten in the streets. You ended up with people being charged. You ended up with people being martyred for a cause that they didn't even go there to protest for.
Exactly.
Right?
It was unbelievable.
And so you've got these truly patriotic Canadians who love their country, who are there to save their country, who are there to save Canada, being manipulated by people who have wrapped themselves in the flag and are fake patriots, who are faking the whole thing because they're truly enemies of the state and want to tear the country apart. They're manipulating people, and they're good intentions.
They were working on it. They were definitely causing a disruption. Which
was the actual goal of the convoy, not to overthrow the government so much, but they didn't have a, so it wasn't a coup. It wasn't a coup of the government, but it did end up being a coup of the Conservative Party.
Yeah. Well, there was another thing going on over there, but as far as the movement is concerned, it caused a big disruption, of misunderstanding of what had just taken place. And nobody fully understood, except for a few of us, that didn't have to happen. There was something wrong going on here. That didn't have to happen. And then when I got these posts of, Tamara Lynch is a hero and Chris Barber's a hero and blah blah blah, well, this just made my blood boil. Like, they're not friggin' heroes. Something's wrong here. So I said, we're getting close to the court dates now. So now I'm going to open up a 4-part series because I couldn't do it all in one show.
Yep.
Okay. I had to do it in 4 shows where I'm bringing in this, and I'm going to show you who the real person is that started the convoy and what happened to her. Okay. Which is Bridget
Belton.
Belton. Okay. And what happened to her? Well, she came in on the last show. She explained herself beautifully and explained what happened to her. And, she shed enough light on it that, okay, maybe Tamara Lynch isn't such a hero. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And Chris Barber. Maybe they're not such heroes because of what they did. Okay.
Yep. Yep.
And the reasons behind why they did what they did, I did in the previous shows. So, I brought it out, the facts of what really happened and what went wrong with Freedom Convoy 2022, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now, and I did it for the one reason, and that is because if we ever get into that situation again where we're going to have a big event, let's be aware of who's saying what, okay? And who's doing what. Because, just because somebody sounds good, okay? And just because they're put out there, all right? It doesn't always match what the motives are, okay? I mean, if there's the slightest little thing that isn't on point with the why we're there and the reasons we're there isn't clear,
Yep.
then I would be questioning what is going on here, okay? Because we should never find ourselves in that situation again where we get so misled that we end up facing riot police and come down to that kind of a thing. That should never be happening in Canada when it comes to the situation of fixing our country. Okay.
Right. Yep.
I mean, this is for everybody. We're standing up there for all Canadians,
And do
not
you think,
just.
yeah, and do you think, Ruddi, that it's appropriate, would be appropriate for like a foreign government or for foreign money to be flowing in here to influence our politics?
No, not at all.
Right.
No, I don't
I don't
think so.
think
I
so
don't think
either.
that's right. I think that is another agenda. I think that's another agenda within some kind of an agenda.
Mhm.
And we've got to be very careful of this.
Regardless
Okay.
of what country that might be, right?
Exactly. Whether it be China, whether it be whatever, whoever.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, if that is happening,
Not
then
China, not Russia, not
that's a
Iran.
honeypot. That's
Yeah.
that's a honeypot. What I call a honeypot.
Yep.
They draw people in to cause an event, okay, of something different than what we're there for,
Hmm.
okay? And this is kind of what happened with Convoy 2022. They put the dollars up there so people thought, oh, we're well looked after, okay?
Yep.
We got to go. I mean, we're supported, okay? But in reality, what's going on here, okay? Why is this happening, okay? But by the time you're involved in everything else, and you don't have that you have this takeover of the leadership. This is what happened.
Hmm.
The takeover, and they're telling everybody. They're going around to everybody, telling them all communications are coming through us now. Okay,
Yeah.
this is a complete takeover. Okay,
And yeah.
they should have seen it coming.
And
Okay,
you talked about the honeypot, you talked about the money, and
yeah,
now it's documented. It's a fact that
yeah.
56% of this money came from where?
The United States, from
Right.
what you're telling me,
Right. It's absolutely true.
you know.
And we're also seeing US money flowing into the JCCF. We've
Mm.
seen also, or did you have you ever read Tamara Litch's book?
No, I wouldn't bother
So there's
spending a nickel on
a
that thing.
so there's a
I really
section,
wouldn't.
there's an important section in there where she mentions someone by the name of Alex.
Oh yeah.
Alex is directly tied to the Trump Tower in Toronto. Do you know what Alex offered Tamara Litch?
No, what?
A plane ticket anywhere she wanted to go to avoid prosecution.
Really? Isn't that convenient?
Oh, yeah.
Well, she had a cruise. She had a boat cruise booked shortly after the sentencing. Okay. So what's with that? I mean, who books a cruise when you don't know if you're going to be doing 5 years or 2 years or what you're doing, what is the fix in already that you could be booking a cruise?
So
You
now,
know,
now we're seeing fingerprints on this from a foreign organization, a foreign political organization, the Trump organization, MAGA, U.S. money, U.S. big oil, U.S. The Koch brothers through the Atlas network flowing into the JCCF. We're seeing Tamara Litch acknowledge that she's been speaking to this business person tied to Trump Corp and the Trump Tower, offering plane tickets to people to avoid political prosecution, which means flee the
wow,
country.
wow,
It goes deeper.
wow, wow.
It
I
goes
didn't
deeper.
imagine that this went that deep. Holy crap. I knew that there was some
Are you?
political playing going on here.
And as I say,
Okay.
more than one thing
I
can
didn't
be true at
realize
the
that
same.
deep.
More than one thing can be true at the same time. So we
Wow.
have Norman Traversy there, who
Oh
is
yeah,
a
he's another
sovereign
one.
citizen, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Norman?
Yeah, Norman Travesty.
Who's who
Yeah,
is
I've
who who is Norman Traversy tied to?
who is he tied to? This ought to be good.
Major General Paul Vallely, retired
Right.
general, directly tied to an advisor to President Trump during the convoy.
Wow.
Said that he was. Uh, they've made public statements. General Vallely was on this program, talked about providing advice to certain convoy organizers, including Norman Traversy. In fact, here, watch this. I still have this clip just handy.
I and some other people in Ottawa were the reception committee. I live in Ottawa. I've got a friend who owns a boutique hotel, a 24-room hotel, and she booked rooms for only people that knew me. And we ran that convoy from this hotel in downtown Ottawa. A lot of the people helping were ex-military and ex-police.
Okay.
And it goes on. That was General Vallely, by the way, up in the top left-hand corner of your screen. That was Norman Traversy speaking,
I didn't
who
get to see it.
who also, yeah, maybe you couldn't see it on your end.
I didn't have the other screen going.
I see, and he delivered documents, or tried to deliver documents, has tried to deliver documents called a quo warranto to the federal government, basically advocating for the overthrow of the government, above and beyond this MOU from the Canada, what was it, Canada United group, and which the government was very concerned about. And here's Norman Traversy continuing on that same podcast, kind of just solo with the host.
And he was also is an advisor to President Trump.
He's talking about Major General Vallely, talking about how he, the general, is an advisor directly to President Trump with a direct line there.
And he was also is an advisor to President Trump. So he's kind of our way to contact Trump. Cool. I got an email from Donald Trump in 2020 thanking me. So we've been in touch during the convoy. I was one of the organizers. And every evening I would phone General Vallely, and he had a map of Ottawa on his wall. He's in Montana. And he would then report to President Trump. And he would also give me assignments like, go to Waverly Street and do this, or tell those guys not to do that, or whatever.
General Vallely has been involved in, a ton of psyops and I would say even color revolutions. Have you ever heard of a color revolution, Ruddi?
No.
A color revolution is when a foreign intelligence service government creates the conditions for a massive protest in a country to destabilize the country,
Okay.
destabilize the government.
Well, I've heard of we call it red flag operations.
Yeah. So what they do is they identify anti-government groups inside a country, and they support them. It doesn't matter what side they're on. The whole objective is simply to cause disruption and to discredit the government. And so this Freedom Convoy in a way, had all the earmarks of being manipulated in that way. So you had a lot of people going there with, pure intentions. The vast
Mhm.
majority of people, even some of the organizers, may have been influenced, shall we say, by the money coming in
Oh,
from
definitely.
foreign
Oh,
sources, and
big time.
as you can see, certain people would have been aware of what is
Mhm.
going on. And then above and beyond that, not only do you have the influence of foreign money, you're also seeing people admit that they had direct ties to this foreign political operation down in the United States, the Trump organization, not in power at the time, but running something of a shadow organization and positioning themselves to take power in the United States again. And what are we
Mhm.
seeing? What have we seen with President Trump of late? He wants Canada to be the 51st state. He's talking about annexation. He's, also
Yeah,
meddling
he's
in
putting in
Alberta
these
separatism. He's playing games.
yeah, he's putting in these innuendos.
Mhm.
Okay. And
And you're
I'm
seeing these,
shaking my head here.
yeah, and you're
Okay,
seeing who
because
who are you seeing go down to meet with President Trump in Mar-a-Lago since the convoy, since all of this started with the 51st state rhetoric? Who are you seeing
yeah.
go down there?
Well, that was Danielle Smith. She went down there,
Oh, more than that, though, Ruddi.
and
More than just Danielle Smith.
all the provincial premiers were trying to get a meeting at one point. They
Yeah,
were at the White
and
House.
they never did get a direct
Yeah,
meeting.
they
But
never did get the meeting.
some people did have been able to get direct meetings with some very influential people down there. And you know who some of those people might
Who is that?
represent?
Who's
Alberta
that?
separatists.
Okay,
And
yeah.
I
There's
know
a
some.
lawyer with a
Yeah, they've
cowboy
been
hat
going
on
down
his
there.
head. I forget
Yes,
his name.
Jeffrey Rath.
There you go.
Yeah, they've been
Now
going down there. They've been meeting with
they
the
they
Trump
started this
administration.
they started this thing with going down to the States and talking with Trump, and they started
Mhm.
but they're off on a different, this guy's off on a different tangent than what I'm
Right.
on. Okay.
Right, but you start to see how the dots
Yeah.
connect, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
I see that.
to that core group of people
Yeah. I see
that
that.
injected themselves into the convoy,
Yes.
who, as you say, kind of took it over or hijacked it,
That's
right?
right. This
For other
guy, this
purposes.
lawyer guy, okay, comes in there and he does
Mhm.
go down to the States,
Yep.
and he does go down, and I don't know if he met with Trump or not. I can't say that.
Yeah.
But he did try. He went down there
They've been
anyway.
going down there for meetings. Yep.
Okay. So he's been involved in that, but that's not what my agenda is.
No, that's not
Okay?
yours at
That
all. I know that.
that's that's not it.
Right.
We can call for independence and we could stay Canada. That's where I'm going. Okay?
Mhm.
I'm not saying let's become Americans. Okay? I'm
Mhm.
not saying that at all. Okay? We have every right to back off from the federal government. Okay? We have a right.
But
Every province has a
yeah.
right to do that.
Well,
And
every
this would be a
province
good
has
kick in the
yeah.
ass for
So
them
so
to feel
every
it because
every
of their bullshit,
but
right?
every province has some degree of sovereignty. That's
Right.
absolutely true. But let me just ask you this:
Sure.
do you want Canada to stay together?
I would prefer it. Okay.
Mhm.
But the federal government has to start becoming more reasonable with each province's uniqueness. Okay. Like oil and gas in Alberta, that's their production. That's what keeps their province really going. Okay.
Yeah,
To a
this is the
point.
this, and I understand what you're saying, and
Every
and I
province has
appreciate
its
it.
own
Yeah,
uh,
I know. But
productivity.
here's a little tough
Also,
love.
another thing too
Yeah,
that I learned was we have no interprovincial trade. We
yes,
have
we
this
do.
barrier
Well, we
with
do have
all of these
interprovincial. We do. There are
provinces.
some barriers, but we do
That has
have
to be taken
interprovincial trade.
down. We need more
I understand.
productivity in our country to
Yeah.
make our country more
Here's
vibrant.
here
Okay.
you see here's a little I would say here's a little wake up call for everybody.
Mm,
This narrative that we're getting out of Alberta that you're actually repeating here tonight, that's bullshit. That's the bullshit. Do you want to know why? Because this is the bullshit we've been getting from Quebec all along. This is the bullshit we're getting from, excuse my language. Okay, this is the bullshit that we're getting from these Alberta separatists. Because the truth of the matter is, the more sovereignty that each province has, the more divided the country becomes. The true path forward, and Alberta would be better off with this less sovereignty. Here's why: because you're never going to get your damn pipelines built east west if the provinces are sovereign, because they're each then acting in their own interests out of greed and the desire for power, and these politicians individually. They're not interested in, and they're not representing the interests of the country. And so the true way to get your pipelines built, the true way for overall better prosperity and a better outcome for all of Canada is for a stronger federal government.
Yeah, but did you know that we had a pipeline? We have a pipeline going to the West Coast from Alberta.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. And that was built back in the day.
Yes.
And we still had this sovereignty between provinces.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
We did that. We can come together as Canadians
We can.
from one province to another.
That's very true.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because we're still Canadian.
But
okay,
those things were
done. The problem here with what we're dealing with now today is a corrupt federal government. Okay, that is so corrupt. Okay, so corrupt now. They've put in a ringer, a globalist ringer.
maybe the corruption, Ruddi, is not where you're looking. Maybe the corruption, maybe the real problem with the corruption is sitting out in the province of Alberta.
Well, that's not just it. That's not just it. They're there, sure. I agree.
And
they're there, sure.
And the real
but there's a big anchor.
Why do you think the pipelines aren't really built?
Well, this one was built. Okay.
It was, Ruddi, but the reason they can't get pipelines built today is because every time
the federal government.
No.
Okay, why?
Because every time they try to build one, the federal government is blocked by environmental groups who protest and say you can't build it through here, by Indigenous groups that say no, you're not putting it through our community, by the provinces who say, like Quebec, we don't want your stinking pipeline coming through here. It's a threat to our environment, blah, blah, blah. So you're not putting it through. We don't want it. Okay, so that's why it doesn't.
Well, that's a very easy thing to solve.
Well, it could be, but
I'll tell you why.
But here's the thing. Why do you think why do you think those things happen? Who do you think funds those environmental groups?
Yeah.
Who do you think?
Let me make something clear. Back in the day, Trudeau did this equalization payment thing.
Let me finish.
Sure.
Those environmental groups are often funded by organizations that aren't very environmentally friendly.
I agree.
There's money coming up in there.
Look at Garbeau.
And some of these Indigenous groups aren't even really Indigenous groups.
Yeah.
They're political activist groups funded by foreign money. Now, why would they do that? Because if you're the United States and you have big interest down in the US, this is some speculation. Okay.
Yeah.
But why do you think that the Atlas Network gets involved with the JCCF?
Sure.
Why do you think there's, you got big oil money and why do you think, and then you get somebody like, say, Kevin O'Leary involved, right? A Canadian oligarch who no longer really lives in Canada. And do you know what Kevin O'Leary wants to build?
What does he want to build?
An oil refinery.
Okay.
Where does he want to build it?
I don't know.
In the United States.
Oh, for Christ's sake.
So which way do you think he wants? Which way do you really think he wants that pipeline to flow?
That's crazy.
Do you think he wants the pipeline to flow east-west from Alberta?
That's crazy. So that's against Canadian
a year ago, he announced on television that he wants to build and is going to build with investors a $14 billion.
That's crazy.
In the United States.
That's crazy.
So
with Canadian tax dollars.
No, not with Canadian tax dollars, with investors' money.
Oh, well, even still.
But is he building it in Canada? No, he said he wants to build it in the United States. He says something he really wants to do. You can find the clip online. He talks about it. So you see where the corruption really is. And so who went down to Mar-a-Lago with Danielle Smith?
Yeah.
Who went down there?
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Who went to Mar-a-Lago with Danielle Smith? Kevin O'Leary.
Yeah.
So why is Kevin O'Leary with Danielle Smith hanging out in Mar-a-Lago, making a deal of some kind or whatever she was doing down there with Donald Trump? We don't know what that conversation was, but is Kevin O'Leary elected? Does Kevin O'Leary represent Canada? Does Kevin O'Leary have a mandate from the Canadian people? So what is he doing joined at the hip with the Premier of Alberta going down to Mar-a-Lago when he's got business
Oh, he was right in there like a dirty shirt.
He sure was.
When all this shit was hitting the fan.
Right.
He was in there. Let's become American. He was right in there.
That's right.
You know what I mean? He was right in there like a dirty shirt.
He sure was, wasn't he?
And I mean, I'm taking a step back, and I came out with a statement of you got to be out of your rocker, okay, to want to become American.
Right.
Okay. I mean, you're jumping from one frying pan to a hotter frying pan because their politics is so much different than ours. Okay.
Mhm.
Their medical health care is completely different.
Yep.
Okay. I mean, like, really, you want to jump from the frying pan into the fire? Put it that way. Okay,
Mhm.
is what you're doing. What we should be doing is staying Canadian and fixing our problems as
That's
Canadians.
right. Fix the
Okay,
problems. That's a whole lot easier than
that's a different
burning
thing.
everything to the ground.
That's a different thing. Now,
Mhm.
you get back to Montreal, and back in the day, not this Trudeau, but his dad. Okay,
Yep.
and they wanted to separate. Okay, and there was a big
Quebec.
referendum back in the day
Yep.
about them wanting to separate. So what does he do?
Two.
What does he do? He creates this equalization payment crap. Okay, he starts taking money out of Alberta into Montreal. Okay, and that is what solves the problem of them separating. Okay, from
Do you understand
the rest of
but
Canada.
before we get to you, do you understand how the equalization payments work?
No, I just know that the money was being flowed from Alberta to the east, kind of thing. But
So
how it all works, I don't know.
all the provinces are involved in what they call equalization payments.
Okay,
Okay.
okay.
So I'm really actually getting a little bit tired of all the whining
Mm-mm.
because it's largely a misrepresentation. Equalization payments, if you're a province that has a lot of wealth, like Alberta,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ontario, okay,
Mm-hmm.
we pay into the equalization payments so
Like,
that
so
then
Montreal wasn't so much money and it would go into
no,
there. Or
no,
okay.
not much. No, not about a city. Okay, it goes into this overall pool of money, so
Okay.
that the provinces with sort of large, like that are more wealthy, that generate more income, more GDP. Okay,
Okay. Okay.
okay, they the basically the federal government says, well, there's a lot of revenue coming in there. We're going to tax that, and so this tax revenue goes into the federal fund, like the federal budget, and
Mm-hmm.
then it goes into equalization payments so that it goes in. So the money is then divided up across the country to go to this province and that province. So, the Northwest Territories, we need, they need health care, but you still need doctors up in the Northwest
Mm-hmm.
Territories, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
money will go up there to make sure that there are programs in place because we're a vast country with it's difficult to get people to move there. So sometimes it's not profitable, right,
Mm-hmm.
for companies to go there. So the government fills in the backstop. There are other programs in certain areas of the country. Now, I'm not saying that the equalization payments are always, the distribution of the funds is always fair, and that
Mm-hmm.
certainly needs to be reviewed. But the point is, it's about taking money from provinces that are wealthy, putting it into the fund, and then distributing that across the country. So if you've got a province that isn't able to meet the needs of the citizens, or a
Mm-hmm.
territory in remote locations, these
Mm-hmm.
are for various reasons. The money is
Mm-hmm.
distributed across the country so that we have sort of an equal standard of living for all Canadians. So we share the wealth of the nation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now,
So,
the problem
mm-hmm.
with this is that some of these provinces, and Alberta in particular right now, they seem to view the oil as like exclusively theirs. It's all the resources are ours. You don't have the right to tax this. We're going to keep it all. You have basically 5 million people who live in all of Alberta. And if you listen to these separatists, they're telling people we shouldn't have to share any of that. That's all ours. We get to keep that. And if we separate from the rest of Canada, we'll never have to share any of that. And Jeffrey Rath, that lawyer, stood up, and I watched a speech that he gave on just the other night. And he's telling people, if we separate, you'll be instantly like $20,000 to $30,000 a year richer, because you won't have to pay any federal income tax anymore. And all this equalization money that we're sending out to Alberta, or out to the federal government every month, all that money, that'll just stay right here. And that's a bunch of bunk, Ruddi. It's a freaking lie.
um,
You know why it's a lie?
actually, actually, no, it's not.
Yeah, it's a lie.
Because no, it's not.
It's a
Because every province has its own district. It's its own.
Yeah.
It has it's the resources in that
Yeah,
province
I
are
understand.
in that
I
province.
understand that technically, yes,
Okay,
the
so he's right.
provinces have jurisdiction over
They have
resources.
jurisdiction over their
However,
resources.
here's the lie.
Mm,
Here's the lie.
okay,
The federal government still has the right to tax things. And in a
that's if they stay with the federal
that's
government.
no, don't get hung up on the I don't want to get hung up on the technical
Okay,
mumbo jumbo. The point of
okay.
the matter is when they're telling you that you're going to be richer,
Oh,
it's
that's a
a lie.
lie.
That's a lie.
That part is a lie because, and I'll tell you
Because
why it's a lie.
yeah,
Because you don't trust these guys.
it's not just that.
Okay, I mean,
You don't
no, but
trust
I mean,
Jeffrey
they built
Rath.
this up. They built this up. Okay,
No,
like what
if
you were saying, they've been working on this for a while.
yeah.
Okay, so they're not thinking of the people.
No,
They
it's
never
not.
have.
No. We're getting off in the weeds.
Okay.
If Alberta separates,
Mm-hmm.
if any province separates, if Alberta becomes its own nation,
Mm-hmm.
sovereign, not
Mm-hmm.
part of Canada,
Mm-hmm.
independent,
Mm-hmm. They can.
okay, if they do,
Mm-hmm.
here's the hard reality that Jeffrey Rath and Keith Wilson are not telling people.
Mm.
Now they're going to be responsible for all the things that the federal government doesn't provide. Some of those equalization payments, they come back to Alberta for infrastructure projects to build bridges. Some of that money
Mm-hmm.
even flows down through transfer payments into your healthcare system. It filters down into municipalities. It's
Mm-hmm.
this money, some of it does flow back, but more than that, Alberta also shares in the benefits of being part of Canada through like military defense. Now, if you think that you're going to save a whole crap load of money and be
Mm-hmm.
a lot wealthier simply because you're not going to have to pay federal income tax anymore or something that these guys are telling you, that is a lie. Because as soon as Alberta becomes responsible for everything from
Military to
pension
healthcare,
funds to healthcare, which
right?
they're already responsible for
And they
healthcare.
would
That is
be.
provincial jurisdiction, but
Yeah.
the funding for healthcare is not the funding is not exclusively provincial. The federal government provides transfer payments back to Alberta to fund a lot of your healthcare. And in addition to that,
Mm-hmm.
you go and if you become an independent province, now you're going to have to buy your own F-22 fifth generation fighter jets to
Fighter
defend your
jets.
territory.
Yep.
And you buy a few of those, and pretty soon the billions that you think you're going to be saving, that's going to be eaten up by your military. Now, if you've only got 5 million people out there, like
Yeah,
literally 5 million, that's it.
that's right.
In all of Alberta, that's not
Yeah.
even, they have more people in New York City, dude,
That's the part.
than you do in Alberta. Okay.
That's the part that they're not fully examining
This is a
to the public.
lie. You cannot.
Well, no, it's not a lie.
No, the lie
It's
is
just
that you're
something that
suddenly
they're
going to
not
be this much
explaining.
richer. You're not going to have to pay any taxes.
But
It's
that's
going to
the
be
part they're not
utopia.
explaining.
That's not true.
Yeah, that's the part they're not fully explaining.
That's right.
Okay, but with what has happened with Carney, okay, if you added 5 more provinces to that equation, then you're talking some serious shit. Okay, and this is
Yeah.
my plan. Okay, this is my plan. Okay, I'm not taking any more shit out of Carney. Okay, I'll tell you that right now. This guy's a plant, a globalist plant. Okay, it was right there in the cards from the get-go. So this guy's freaking out now because of what I stated today earlier. And that is, it doesn't have to be one province, but it can be the whole western side of things of Canada. Like when you take Manitoba, Saskatchewan,
Yeah.
Alberta, British Columbia, Yukon, and the Northwest Territories coming into an independent equation.
Right.
Now you're talking some serious shit, okay?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be just Alberta, all right? So
is
this
this what you
Carney,
want? You want
it doesn't have to be just Alberta going into an independence,
Yeah.
okay? All these provinces can do the same thing and join their own simple government similar to the federal government, okay? Protecting those 5 provinces in what they want to do. Now, Carney is a devil in disguise, okay, for Canada. I see past this guy like no tomorrow. He's a
Mhm.
plant. He was right from the get-go. Right from where they did the little switcheroo for the party and all that shit and everything. And then all of a sudden, with this big election, and he's got all the votes and all this shit. We're looking into the voter fraud going on. Okay, we're looking into this
Okay.
heavily.
Okay. Whoa. Whoa. Put the brakes on.
Digress, sure, but
If you
we're
whoa,
looking
whoa,
into
whoa, whoa,
this.
whoa, 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 whoa,
Sure,
whoa.
go ahead.
Around here, we deal in facts, okay?
Yeah,
Not
we're
not
looking into
in
it.
not in theories.
No,
And
there.
there and
Yeah,
until sir, you come up with some actual evidence
yeah,
of
we're looking into it.
voter fraud, then we can talk about it. But until you show me some absolute evidence
Right,
of fraud,
I
then
agree.
this is not a subject that matter that we're going to discuss here because
That's
I
why I
don't
say I'm only
I'm
looking
tired.
into it right now.
Yeah, and well, I've seen people trying to allege this. I've seen bullshit videos about it, and I've been talking to people about it. I know how the system works. No, until you've got some real evidence about this stuff, I'm not interested in getting off into the
I
conspiracy
agree.
weeds.
I
Okay.
agree. I agree
And
totally.
is that what you want? You want the country to break up? You want these provinces to leave? You want them to scoop
The
up
other
Saskatchewan,
side of this,
Manitoba,
the other side
Alberta,
of this, the other side of this,
BC?
if we just sit back and do nothing and
Yeah.
we let Carney go ahead the way he's going, it's going to be a disaster for Canada.
Well, okay. Um, Ruddi,
What
we
is
need
he
to we,
saying about gas engines and the green thing that he's
the green
talking
thing.
about?
Look,
You know,
these are separate issues, and
mhm.
we can have these discussions on climate change, environmentalism. Oh, we lost him again for a sec. He'll come back. There we
Just
go.
a bit. Okay, sorry
Yeah,
about that. I had a
yeah.
call coming in.
Okay, these are separate things. I've been
I
saying
agree.
for a while. Okay, the the thing is, the issue here at hand tonight is whether Canada stays together as a country.
I would
All right,
love for
and
Canada to
so
stay together.
the
Okay.
issue at hand is foreign influence,
Hmm.
a hidden agenda, and the convoy
How bad has it gotten though?
that you've stumbled upon, right?
Yeah, but how bad has it already gotten into our country?
Um,
Okay. That,
how bad has
you know
it
what I mean?
become?
Yeah. I mean, like when you look at the way Carney got to be prime minister, okay? I mean, that gave all the ammunition to these guys that we're talking about, a lot of ammunition, okay? Because they're popping,
What do you
okay?
mean the way he became prime minister? What's wrong with the way he
Well,
became prime minister?
the way he became prime minister from start to now, I mean, the
Mhm.
way that uh, Trudeau prorogued government for X number of days and said, okay, I'm going to step down. Well, he never stepped down. He prorogued government
He did step
until the
down.
point of, yeah, he stepped down, but not right away.
There's a
He
process.
stepped down in a way. There was a process, but he put his party in there before anything else.
And
Okay,
even
there
that,
was
if
he
I can
shut
pause
down
for just a
government.
moment, why
He
does
shut down government.
why does a government prorogue parliament? What are some of the main reasons for that?
I'll let you go ahead and give me the reasons.
Well,
So we don't.
one of the main reasons a government will prorogue parliament is if there's an existential threat to the government itself. And what was going on at the time when Trudeau prorogued government? What was the discussion beginning to center around? Donald
Well, there was
Trump's
so
threat?
many scandals that
No,
it
no,
was
no, no,
unbelievable.
no, 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 no,
No,
no.
okay. What was
This
going
is
on?
the unspoken truth, Ruddi.
Okay, shoot.
Donald Trump was threatening to annex the country.
No, Donald Trump was
Yeah.
talking about tariffs,
And
and I'll tell you something
annexing the
wrong with
country,
that.
and the
I'll tell you
51st state
something wrong with
rhetoric
that.
was all ramped up. That's so when the
Just a minute.
government is facing that kind of a threat, that is one of the
Hang on.
reasons. If you look
That
it
was a
up,
rhetoric. That was a rhetoric because I'll tell you
a
why.
rhetoric.
A rhetoric because we have been tariffing
So he didn't mean
U.S.
it, even though he's saying he
No,
means it. He didn't
we've
mean
been
it.
tariffing U.S. goods for the longest time.
Yeah, the
We've
U.S.
already
tariffs was
had tariffs
so
against U.S. products
so.
all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. And when Trump was talking about
Well, for crying out
we've
loud.
been ripped off as Americans over that.
Do you really
That's
believe
what he
we're
was
ripping
talking
off
about.
Oh, Ruddi, do you think we're ripping off the United States?
No, we had tariffs on U.S. goods
Which goods?
coming into Canada.
Which goods?
Well, you're gonna have to look it up.
I
There's
don't
a
need to
big
look it up.
list.
I know.
There's a list,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
of stuff that was tariffed
So,
from U.S. to coming into Canada.
yeah, regardless of the tariffs, did we not have a trade deal?
They called it a free trade, but it wasn't free trade.
Who negotiated that free trade deal?
Well, that wasn't Trump with the negotiations or anything like that. Well,
Yes,
that
it
was
was.
with Harper and
No.
oh yeah, there was one
No.
between Trudeau and Mexico and
Oh, Ruddi.
Trump
Listen, man.
in his first term.
You got to get your history right. I was there. I covered
Yeah,
Brian,
in his first term, he did a deal.
I covered Brian Mulroney when
Okay.
he came to power, and the issue when Mulroney came to power as the conservative prime minister was free trade, and that's when the first free trade agreement was actually signed. Okay, so that goes back to the Mulroney government, and then that deal remained in place for quite a long time, and it was mutually beneficial to both Canada and the United States, and that involved all of the goods that we are involved with. And yes, there were tariffs on some goods on our side. There were some tariffs on the U.S. side too that Trump doesn't talk about, but all of that was integrated into NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. That remained in place from the Mulroney government right up until when Donald Trump took office. First took office. So then Trump comes along in 2016 and says, I'm renegotiating NAFTA because that's the worst trade deal ever. Okay. And then we had the government in place, and Trump negotiates at that time the USMCA, the United States Mexico trade agreement. Okay. Right. And so Trump negotiated that directly. He was directly involved with the Canadian government at the time and Trudeau. And he came out and said, now that's the best trade deal that has ever been signed. Yeah. All right. That's right. So that deal remains in place. And Trump says that's the best one ever. And even then, we still had some tariffs in place on both sides. Right. That's Trump's deal. Right. It's his best ever. Then he's ousted from power, comes back, and then he wants to start it all over again. And then he's like, F this, you guys are ripping us off. How can we be ripping him off if we're trading back and forth using the terms of the USMCA, which he negotiated? He's full of crap. In the first place. This is a pretext for the use of tariffs. And people think, Ruddi, and all this stuff is upside down world right now with Trump world, okay? Because you're confused. A lot of people are confused about these tariffs, how they work. People don't even know what a tariff is. And what the tariff is it's a mechanism for control. Donald Trump is not a conservative. Donald Trump is not a free market guy. Donald Trump does not believe in the free market system. Donald Trump is a control freak. Donald Trump is using tariffs because tariffs are the ultimate form of economic control. Okay, so Trudeau, this happens on Trudeau's watch. Forces everyone to come to him, including Justin Trudeau. This happens on Trudeau's watch. So what does Trudeau do? He steps out. He prorogues. And puts his party for several reasons, not the least of which is that the government is under this existential threat. But Trudeau can't really come out and say this publicly because you can't talk about the United States being an actual threat to the sovereignty of Canada out in the open. You can't talk about that openly, but because that becomes an international incident. You can't talk about General Vallely threatening the country. You can't talk about that openly because it becomes an international diplomatic hot potato. Nightmare. All right. But he was saying it would all boil back to the fact of the amount of fentanyl that was flowing across the U.S. border. Yeah. That's what his excuse was. Lie. It's another pretext. It's a lie. But they did catch a huge lab in British Columbia. No, Ruddi, we have a problem with fentanyl, but it's the other way around, my friend. Go do the research. The truth of the matter is acknowledged by the U.S. government itself, including Tulsi Gabbard, when she issued her security report to to the House, okay,
Right.
Canada wasn't even listed as one of the security threats to the United States because the whole fentanyl thing is just a pretext, an excuse for any action that Trump wants to take. The truth of the
Okay.
matter is, as acknowledged by the US government, is less than 1% or about 1% of all the fentanyl going into the United States comes from Canada. The truth of the matter is the fentanyl in Canada is coming from the United States into Canada. And the majority of it that is processed here is actually exported from ports in places like Vancouver to markets in places like New Zealand and Australia. That's the truth. But some of these, I would say, propagandists out there, and I don't want to even mention their name here again tonight, they're spinning up stories to support the Trump narrative that Canada is this national security threat because we're flooding the US with fentanyl from Canada, when in reality, it's coming up here. And we've got the problem because they're exporting it to us. And also it's coming in through our ports from China on both sides of our border, east and west, through our ports, okay, and by air to some degree, but a lot of it's coming up to Canada from the US. It's the other way around. I
Okay.
could
Well,
get
what they
into
were
more about
promoting
this
was
stuff.
that it was the other way around. That it
I
was
know,
coming from
because he flips
Canada.
everything upside down and he's
Yeah,
making
he
an
flipped it.
excuse. He
Okay.
flipped it, and it's a lie.
Okay.
It's a lie.
Okay.
100%. And they're
Okay.
doing, frankly, a lot of the same things down on the US-Mexico border, where they do have a problem with the open border and drug flow, but they've now, and even recommended over the last number of years, and now a reality, Major General Vallely advised President Trump to designate the drug cartels in Mexico as terrorist organizations, which then creates the pretext and the justification, the excuse for putting military units on the Mexican border. And that's what we've got going on there now.
What does Danielle Smith do? She
Well,
goes down to meet with Trump,
yes,
comes back with, we're going to strengthen our border. We're putting a lot more security on our border, making it look like that narrative was true. Okay.
yeah,
That's what Danielle Smith did.
yeah,
Okay. Was making it look like that narrative was true coming
yeah,
from Trump, that
yeah.
there's a big problem. And
That's
then
right.
there was a big bust in
Which is
BC.
what I also said. Okay, this is why I said you got to be careful what you do as you capitulate to Trump, because what he's really doing, he's laying the trap for you. So because what he's done is he said, I'm going to tariff the snot out of you unless you fix this drug problem. All right. But you see, he is actually playing 4D chess, because what he really was doing there was he was setting up the conditions where you buy into his reality.
Oh yeah, and
Okay,
the politicians up here played it.
So then he's the politicians up here are saying, well, okay, what does he want? Let's just give him what he wants so that we don't get the tariffs. Well, I want you to fix the drug problem that doesn't exist. And they go, well, okay. So they get some helicopters. They do a photo op at the Alberta border.
Yeah.
So, the federal government, they didn't even actually do anything, Ruddi. What they did is they highlighted a security program that they'd already budgeted for. And then they put that forward and said, look at what we're doing to fix the border. And then Trump said, so then they're sort of acknowledging the problem that doesn't really exist. But then by acknowledging the problem, now Trump has his pretext for any kind of action that he wants to take later, even though the problem doesn't exist, even though Canada
then they're
isn't
just
listed
feeding
as
into this.
even
They're
though
feeding into it.
they're feeding his narrative.
Yeah.
And falling into the trap.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this is a sidebar to everything that we've been talking about. Okay.
Yeah.
But the reality of the situation is, and the most important thing that I'm trying to focus on here tonight is really what you stumbled upon in some of your work that highlights issues that are related to a lot of what I've been digging into and connecting more of the dots and dealing in actual facts, which is what we want to deal with here tonight. And the reality is we have laid all this out. That the convoy was a vehicle of disruption.
Oh, definitely.
That was being used on one level and was hijacked by these separatists who want to tear the country apart.
Oh, for sure.
That is the point. And
that definitely happened.
and innocent Canadians
Got
who
caught in the
went there
middle.
peacefully, who are the true patriots, who wanted to save their country, who
Yeah.
wanted to fix the
And got
problems
caught in
of
the
their
middle of all
country.
of this. Yeah.
Caught in the middle of it. Not just caught in the middle of it. They were pushed out, thrust out into the front, and martyred. They were
Oh,
sacrificed
yeah,
as
yeah, yeah,
pawns, cannon
definitely.
fodder. They were
Yeah,
beaten
that's
in the
right.
streets. They suffered. They were hurt. They were trampled by horses. They were the ones who suffered because
Mhm.
of the actions of people who had other motives. Is that
Exactly.
fair?
Oh, exactly. That's exactly what happened.
Right.
That's exactly what we uncovered.
And
Okay.
so what we've
So,
done here tonight, if you know, get your assessment on this, wouldn't you agree that what we've done is important to highlight this, to make people aware as Canada is now facing this
oh, yeah.
question of unity?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think there needs to be more discussion on what is actually going on here. Like today
No.
with this broadcast, okay,
Mhm,
we've established certain things I wasn't aware of and some things you weren't aware of.
mhm,
And we have seen a difference of opinion here going on,
mhm,
okay,
mhm.
which is very important because
Yes.
that's how Canada functions, really.
Yeah.
Okay. Not with this, shut the free speech up and nobody say nothing. Okay.
Mhm.
We need these discussions to get a foothold on really what we should be doing.
Yeah.
Okay. And you know, that's a big thing in Canada.
And there's
We've
a
got
big
to come to
yeah,
this
and there's a huge difference
understanding.
between facts and narratives.
Exactly.
And I've been hitting the rewind button a lot, as I do, to go back and review things in the past because hindsight is usually much clearer, sometimes even 2020. And
Right.
because of your work and some of what you uncovered, that really put my antenna up, and I started to dig a lot deeper again. And I thank you for that because
Oh, you're quite welcome.
you've helped me get closer to the truth. And then by coming on here tonight and us having this discussion, sharing all of this information, I think I hope, helped all the viewers out there get closer to the truth tonight
Well,
as
the
well.
one thing about the convoy was they kept pushing this narrative that Tamara Leach and Chris Barber and others were the
Yeah.
heroes
Yeah.
of this big event.
Yeah.
Okay. When in fact, they're not the heroes.
Yeah.
Okay. The heroes were the protesters and the guys on the ground,
Yep.
and the leadership was on a different track.
Yep.
Okay. Than what they should have been. And so this had to be brought out
Yep.
to the public to understand really what happened,
Mhm.
to get a good eye on this,
Mhm.
as to what is what. And I think it was important to have that understanding
And
because
it took me quite a while to kind of see through the veneer of this, right? The deception. And
right.
what about you? Took some time
Oh,
for
big time.
yeah,
I mean, for the longest time, I had a struggle within myself, okay, over this, okay. But the longer it went on, where I never did anything, where I never said anything, then the more it became more ugly, okay,
Mhm.
and distorted, okay. And I thought, to hell with that, okay. If anything, we gotta understand the truth
Mhm.
of what that was, okay,
Yeah,
not what it wasn't, but what it was, for what
yeah,
it was, okay, to get an understanding of really what was going on in our country, okay.
yep,
And it wasn't just happening with that, it's happening with other things too that are going on, okay.
mhm,
And you know they're trying to distort what is Canadian, okay, and what
yeah.
isn't Canadian,
That's
all
right.
right. And that's the problem here, okay,
Yes,
because I'm a Canadian. All
yes,
right. I was
right,
born here
right.
and I want to stay Canadian. Okay.
Yes, yeah,
And if it means doing an example or something or whatever, as long as it's in a fashion of being Canadian, then
hmm
I'm all for it. Okay.
hmm
But I'm not going to be deceived by a globalist agenda.
hmm.
Okay. Or
You
a
know what? Let's
globalist
take a little break.
takeover.
We can come back and we'll switch subjects just a little bit
Sure.
as we get into the last leg of this discussion tonight. Stay with us, folks. Ruddi Bruce, trucker, freedom fighter. More on the other side of this.
Maverick News. The world is watching. Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals. Defenders of individual rights and freedoms. Credible. Trusted. Grounded in reality. Maverick News. Maverick News. Defending free speech. Free speech. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're back with Ruddi Bruce, Canadian trucker, freedom fighter, convoy, participant, promoter, kind of, promoter, and host of the Ruddi Bruce broadcast, where we just went through a lot of the information that he revealed, exposed, really, over a 4-part series about the true motives that at least the one core group that sort of injected themselves into the leadership of the convoy had, that were not really directly related to the motives that the majority of people went there for, which was to say that they were there to end the mandates. And Ruddi, one last thing with regard to all that before we move on to this next subject.
Sure.
There's an interesting thing that I wish I had. It's a very basic thing, and this kind of shows why the premise for the convoy, as used by some, was even somewhat disingenuous. Even if the federal government had ended the mandates for truckers, the vaccine mandates, do you know why that wouldn't have worked? And why wouldn't have made a difference?
Because the American side was still pushing for the
right,
the so-called thing.
They actually had mandates in place on the U.S. side, so which the Canadian government had no jurisdiction over anyway.
Well, that would have started another part of a movement, but that would have been more on the American side, not on the Canadian side.
Yeah, it would have been on the American side.
But at least we would have had a victory on the Canadian side, and then it would have reflected to the American side.
Yeah.
The
point being that really the government didn't have the ability to really help the truckers.
That would have thrown the ball. That would have thrown the ball back to them.
Yeah.
Simple. And then with the truckers thing, we already have a unity, if you want to call it that, with truckers on the other side. So they would have picked up the ball, on that. But the Canadian government, the way it went,
they
didn't get the chance for that to happen. So, they were bashing us.
But the point is, protesting on Parliament Hill isn't going to fix the problem on the U.S. side. That's
exactly.
Different.
Exactly. I understood that.
So
we understood that. Yeah.
Anyway, let's move on. You want to talk about what was it? Globalism or something?
Well, let's go into Carney.
Okay.
There's a good one. And I'm sure, let your viewers ask. I'll put it out there to your viewers. Do you want to hear my theory with Carney?
Okay.
Or not?
Sure.
Okay, let's ask your viewers.
As long as we're not going to get sued or anything.
No.
Yeah.
You just refer back to his book.
Yeah.
Okay. Carney's wrote a book. Okay.
Values.
A lot of his stuff is there. Okay. Carney is a snake in the grass. and that's my opinion.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, have you read the book?
No, but I've watched other people's commentary on his book. Okay.
Yeah.
That and then that's enough for me. I don't want to read this guy's
No, well,
garbage.
that's not enough.
But other stuff,
No.
I mean, coming out of UK, okay, he was the he did something in UK. The UK didn't like him. Okay,
Why? Yeah, I know what you're referring to, but do you know what
he
you're even
wasn't good
talking
in the
about?
UK.
Yeah.
You
Look,
know.
I'm not a liberal. Okay. And so don't
Yeah.
get me wrong, folks. Okay.
Okay.
But I am a journalist.
No, your
I,
viewers are saying
I,
yes, please.
I look
They
at
want to
all
hear it.
sides. I look at all
Yeah.
sides, and I want to deal in factual
Okay, but
information.
let's look at Carney
So,
for a minute.
okay, we're going to look at Carney. So you're
Yeah.
talking about what he did in the UK.
Okay.
Explain.
Oh no, just that he was in charge of something and he fucked it up. That's
No,
all
he
I know
didn't.
with that.
No, he didn't actually.
He didn't fuck it up.
Not really.
They called him something not nice. Okay,
I know. And
they didn't say he was a hero. Okay?
Right. Where were those accusations coming from?
Go ahead, shoot.
Okay. What you're referring to is Mark Carney was the governor of the Bank of England after he was the Bank of Canada governor.
Canada, that's right.
Now, he was the governor of the Bank of England for a period of time during the economic crisis there. And when Liz Truss became prime minister in much the same fashion, frankly, as Mark Carney. She became prime minister through a similar process where there was the leader stepped aside. She was selected as the leader through the party. Then she had to get a seat in the House of Commons, just like Carney. All right. But she's a conservative. She doesn't like Carney because she views him as a globalist, liberal, blah, blah, blah. All right. So she said that she was the shortest serving prime minister in the history of Britain because when she took power, she had to have an election, and she introduced what they called a mini budget. And because of her mini budget, it was so atrocious. It was so poorly planned. She put the national pension plan in jeopardy. It was at risk of going bankrupt. So it was a revolt within the Conservative Party itself, and they got rid of her. She lost the election, and they turfed her because she sucked, and she couldn't do anything. She's the one who sucked. She's the one who caused the problem with the budget. She's the one that caused the crisis with the national pension plan, and they had to bail that out because of her mini budget, which was like it was a disaster. And so she has then, during this election, some of the Carney's opponents, the conservatives over here, they basically went and found Liz Truss and got her to say engage in this smear statement on Carney, saying that he was to blame for the economic crisis that Britain was facing at the time. But here's the truth.
Okay.
He wasn't even the Bank of England governor at the time that she was prime minister.
Okay.
He was the governor 2 years before that.
Oh, okay.
Not even while she
So
was
they used him as a. So you're saying they used him as a smear campaign?
Yeah. So they just got her to say this stuff to hurt him and participate in his character assassination during the Canadian election. But it's not really factual. Now you can make those allegations and say these things, but she's saying that he was responsible for destroying the economy while she was the prime minister. She's using him as a scapegoat for her shortcomings and her crappy budget and her failure as prime minister. That's why her own party got rid of her. So there again, it's like, all right, like I don't want to make excuses for the guy, but let's deal in facts and deal with the issue.
Well, the facts.
Not assassination. And
The
so
facts of the matter are in Trudeau's reign, okay, he was so far up to WHO's you know what, okay, and bringing in their policies, and we have it across our country as ICLEI, that these entities have filtered into the municipalities under this gauze of ICLEI, okay, and all of that is the World Economic Forum bullshit, okay. This has filtered into our country. You know, there we've got people working on those things. The other thing of this is during Trudeau's reign of 9 years, with all of the scandals that he did, without going into them, okay,
well, if we're gonna talk
nothing.
about it, we owe it to the
Okay,
public to
well,
explain what we're talking
we've gone
about.
scandal after scandal after scandal, and nobody has been brought really up on the carpet.
Give me an
on
example.
this.
Give me an example.
Look at the the uh, um, the what do you call it? I'm trying to pick the one. The what do you call it? The deport the deport the card the enter into Canada and all the what do they call it?
Oh, Arrive Can?
Yeah, the
The
Arrive
app.
Cab scam.
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
you look at that one alone.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, it was
Now
pretty
the Arrive
nasty. It was
Can
bad.
scam was
Mhm.
supposedly should have cost this much, and they jacked it to this much. Okay.
Yeah.
And then all of the rest of it.
Yeah,
Okay.
the company that won the tender, that got the contract to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, the price was absolutely,
Unbelievable.
out of line. Yeah.
Okay. And then the disruptions it caused Canadians as a result of that was again unbelievable. Okay. With the fines and the disruption of travel and blah blah blah. Over that simple thing alone, nobody's ever been brought to the carpet. Okay. And the list goes on. Okay. Now, my point is this. The awareness is that Carney is a globalist and in bed with the WHO or the World Economic Forum crap. Okay. Now, we've gone under 9 years of Trudeau's.
All right. So let's just dial that back a
malarkey.
little bit. What is, explain
Excuse me.
how would you describe first of all, the WHO? What is that?
World Economic Forum. Okay. That the WHO, the
WHO?
world, the WHO is supposed to be the oversight of disaster or outbreaks or all of this
It's
stuff.
the World Health Organization.
World Health Organization. That's what it was. The World Health I just didn't. The World Health Organization, where they can declare a pandemic on any part of Canada or all of Canada, okay, or any other country that wants to decide to sign on with this crap, okay. And you look at the ostriches today, okay. Are you aware about the ostriches?
Yeah.
Okay, so here you have 400 birds, okay, that are not sick, all right.
Yeah.
Their policy, their so-called policy, is whether they're sick or not. I mean, whether they're whatever. We're going to run in a PCR test, and you know what that is.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to do this phony baloney PCR test, and we're going to declare any livestock a disaster, and we're going to call them all.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're saying that they got the sickness from wild game, the ducks. So what does that mean now? That all wildlife should be called? Because it can affect the livestock of all cattle and all this stuff. I mean, this is disastrous, okay? We're talking about
whoa,
the food chain.
whoa. Okay, whoa.
Yeah.
Canada Food Inspection Agency, they have, in my view, too much power. That's a
Exactly.
department of the government. And
Yeah.
I've had personal experience dealing with them as a reporter over the years. You know, most notable for me was the emerald ash borer crisis, and where they went through here and chopped down every ash tree from
Oh, wow.
Lake St. Clair all the way to Lake Erie in a hugely expensive program that I said, even as I was reporting on it back then, was doomed to fail because it was a stupid plan. And they were
Right.
going on private property, you know, taking out all these trees. This is years ago,
Yeah.
in order to stop the spread of the emerald ash borer. Well,
Right.
within less than 2 or 3 weeks later, the emerald ash borer, even after they completed all this culling of ash trees in this area, it still ended up in northern Ontario. But you know, that's another thing. But the WHO,
Mm.
right? See, what is it about the World Health Organization specifically that worries you, scares you? What is it?
Well, they're calling PCR testing as a way of finding a disease or not. And
Okay, but
the PCR test
that's not really the, like, what's the function of the World Health Organization?
to find out if there's an outbreak
No. Well,
of
the world,
disease.
okay, so the World Health Organization is an international
Hmm.
organization where the participating countries
Hmm.
cooperate
Hmm.
to identify health threats worldwide so that we can all network together to try to mitigate the risk from whatever diseases
So,
might
what
be out
did
there,
COVID
right?
19 teach
So,
us?
okay, so the concern that some people have, and I share this concern, but I don't share in the conspiracies. The concern that I have is that countries are being asked on some level to turn over authority, or even you could argue sovereignty, over
Hmm.
some aspects of healthcare administration and policy
Hmm.
to the WHO in a binding way.
Hmm.
And I don't think that we should do that. And
No.
largely we don't. We still
Hmm.
have sovereignty over our healthcare system, but we do participate in the programs of the WHO. And this is so that you can get, you know, advice, recommendations, coordinated responses between countries if you have disease outbreaks, which largely makes sense if you think about it, right? If you have governments working properly together and coordinating efforts, you might be able to save a lot of lives. If you've got an outbreak of something, you know, on the other side of the world, it's a very small world with airplanes flying back and forth. So as long as you get the proper kind of responses. That being said, you don't want to go too far and hand over the authority over decision making over whether you do some of these things to a foreign or an international organization. You want your legislation, your laws, your policies still to reside, you know, how you decide to administer these things within your own country. So you
Hmm.
don't want to turn over the authority or sovereignty. Those are the issues. It's how some of these agreements are written. That's
Hmm.
where the concern is. What I do see, though, Ruddi, is certain political groups who are trying to destabilize things here. They
Hmm.
conflate, they exaggerate, they take things out of context, they scare people. There's a lot of fear
Hmm.
mongering that goes on in that regard. And they say, you know, Donald Trump, you know, we're pulling out of the WHO, and people applaud. Well, on the one hand, I understand because you want to preserve your sovereignty over your healthcare system. On the other hand, you still want to be able to coordinate with other countries. So there's a
Well,
balance. There's a
in theory,
balance. There's a
in
balance that needs to
theory,
be
in
struck.
theory, in theory, yes, to a point. Okay. But what they did with the demonstration of COVID 19 was totally off the wall. Okay. It was outside the realm of
Yeah,
medical.
and
I mean,
because
it
we're on
was
YouTube,
totally
I don't want to get too deep into this stuff because we're
okay.
going to get our ass
Okay.
kicked by
I'll just
YouTube, right?
say it wasn't good. I'll
I
just say it
agree,
wasn't good.
but you know,
Yeah.
but it wasn't just Canada that did that. It was virtually every
Oh
government
yeah,
around
it
the
was
world,
lots.
right?
Yeah, it was lots.
To,
It was
to
lots.
one
They
degree or
all
another.
fell for it.
And
Yeah.
again, all these people who think that by joining the United States that we'll never face that again, that's not true, because they had the same kind of response in many places in the US. Even in places like Florida, they did have lockdowns and things like that. They were lifted earlier, okay, than in other places. And DeSantis did some things that I thought were much better. But you know, this was something that was going on all over the world, not
Yes.
just here. And I
But
think
there
that
was a lot of conflicting things going back and
yeah,
forth on different levels,
right. And
and it
so
was a complete disaster.
I understand the concerns, but I
Yeah.
would argue that while I share those concerns and I'm not in favor of giving up our healthcare sovereignty, I also, because I'm a pretty middle of the road guy kind of guy, and as a
Mhm.
journalist, I do look at all sides, and I see the fear mongering too, and a
Okay,
lot of
so
that is not healthy, in my
getting
opinion.
back to our problem with Carney, okay?
Okay, yeah,
Now, with the fact that he's connected here
hmm,
with these organizations, okay, and the way that things
yeah,
got done back on Trudeau's day, and now Carney's come on the scene,
right.
and then you look at the situation with the simple situation of the ostriches, okay, but you take it a step further and you say that, okay, this organization can step on anybody's livestock.
But do you understand why they call those? I haven't looked at that story in, you know, great depth. Okay. I'm
Oh, I
kind of
have.
aware of it, but do
I
you know
have.
why are they calling those ostriches?
Because these ostriches, now the food and it's not the food and drug, it's the Department of um, um, it falls into the what do you call it,
Oh, you
when
got to
it
help me out.
meal when something's on the food chain, okay, there that's their department, okay, but these
Is
birds
it
are
the
not on the food
CFIA?
chain.
Is it the
I guess.
CFIA?
I guess that's, I don't know what you call it. But these birds are not on the food chain. They're on a scientific level. Okay. They're not on the food chain. Nobody's going to consume these birds. Okay.
Mhm.
So this is the wrong department doing the wrong thing. So these birds have an immune system. Okay. And back before anything was said or anything, they started to look at the research of the immune system of these birds. Now, it came out that they have a unique immune system, okay? And that it completely overthrows the pharmaceutical companies' narrative, okay, of what they're trying to do, okay?
What?
Because, oh, yeah, this is a big deal. So, this immune system is natural immunity, okay? That's
Yeah.
why the government got into this and want to knock off these birds because of the immune system of these birds. Okay, this is a complete block of the narrative of what the pharmaceutical companies are trying to put across. Okay, this is the main problem. They're not on the
Yeah.
food chain. Okay, this is scientific research. Okay, so this is where this all came about. Now, these birds are not sick. They have been over the quarantine margin. They're not sick. They're healthy. There's nothing wrong with these birds. Okay. And the government's
Yeah.
reasoning is that to hell with it. I mean, let's still cull them. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, then you may as well go a step further with that. And you may as well say, okay, let's let's uh let's kill all of the wildlife. And if we want to go into people's livestock and cull them too,
So
we'll do that too.
let's take
You
a
know,
look at this story here.
sure. Go ahead.
Because you know, as I say, I haven't really looked
That is the
deeply at it.
daughter. That's the daughter there. If
Hi
you
there,
want to play a
daughter.
clip of her, that's the daughter of these birds. She can explain it
They live on a
better than
farm in
I
the
can.
Kootenays, but the fate of these 400 ostriches is now being decided nearly 600 kilometers away in a federal courtroom on the 8th floor of this Vancouver building. A 2-day judicial hearing underway after the Canadian Food Inspection Agency ordered the entire herd to be culled following an avian flu outbreak in December.
The emotions have been high and it's been a long road, but we do believe that I think that just today truth and science are going to be heard.
Nearly 70 ostriches, 10% of the flock, died, but there has been no
That's
signs of
bullshit.
illness since January 15th.
Well, I don't think it's bullshit, Ruddi.
No,
I think
there was only 2 birds that died. There wasn't that number that they just put out there.
Okay.
That's
The
bullshit.
owners of Universal Ostrich Farms challenged the call order and in January received a reprieve from a federal judge pending a judicial review of the case.
Hi,
We
bird.
think CFIA basically applied a default position to these ostriches when they have been infected with a hybrid disease, not a typical HPAI virus.
The case has garnered widespread attention, with supporters calling on the government to review the way it handles outbreaks so that animals aren't unnecessarily killed.
As this affects all of us, this is our food security. And with our food security, I think we all need to take a stand.
And that's because the ostriches are part of a scientific program researching antibody production against the H5N1 avian flu pandemic, which has been wiping out entire chicken farms. Losing the ostriches, some argue, would be a missed opportunity to find a cure for other birds infected by the disease.
They're learning a lot from their antibodies and their immune systems, and so I think we would lose that. We would also have a dangerous precedent for other farmers and ranchers, and I think it poses a real threat to the agricultural industry in Canada.
In addition to saving the ostriches, those launching the fight hoping for changes to policies.
They're supposed to evolve, and we just want to make the appropriate changes that could bring forth positive outcomes for others that are in the same fight.
So that other options are considered instead of a single and immediate stamping out order. Claudia Van Emmer, Global News, Kelowna.
So it says, well, they say more than 2 died.
Yeah, there was
from
only
the
2.
outbreak. Well, they say nearly
there's
70
400
ostriches died
ostriches.
as a result of the outbreak, and 10% of that flock.
But there's 400 ostriches, and only 2 of them died. Okay.
Well, that's not what it says here, but okay.
Yeah, I know. But if you go further into the more of the stories, there was only 2 of them that died. Okay, and there's 400 altogether.
Yeah.
And that is not true what they just said about.
Okay, so they're lying.
Yeah, no
whatever.
shit.
Okay,
we've got other stories that.
Well, the people
that
from
are
the
out
farm
there
are right there.
Look at the Joe Rogan, not Joe Rogan. Johnny Dole. Have you got his clip?
I don't know who that is, man.
Johnny Dole. Anyway, he gets a whole interview with her and explains the whole thing. Yeah. Johnny Dole.
Do you understand why they would kill them?
Well, they're not sick.
Yeah, but do you know why they would kill them?
Why would they kill them?
To prevent the spread of the disease.
Well, they're not sick. If they're not sick,
they've been
how do you spread a disease that they're not sick from?
Because they've been exposed and they may be carrying the virus.
Well, that's the same with all wildlife.
Proximity to the other birds that died.
Yeah, but that's all wildlife. That would be all of wildlife. Okay?
No, because
that's how they got sick in the first place.
Because they're on a farm and in a.
Yeah, but that's how they got sick in the first place, was because of the ducks. Okay?
Well, regardless, Ruddi, I'm just saying, and I love the people with the signs like "Save the birds," right?
Yeah, but that would be like saying the ducks made him sick, so let's go kill all the ducks. It doesn't make sense.
Well, I don't know. It doesn't say here that the ducks made them sick. We don't know.
Well, if you go further into the story, which I am starting to cover, I'll be covering more of that story.
Have you looked up what the CFIA has released on this? Let's check it out together, because I don't know. This is real time for me.
Yeah.
So here's the CFIA news release on this: response to highly pathogenic avian influenza HPAI-1 on British Columbia ostrich farm. So government says the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and Canada's national poultry sectors have been responding to detections of highly pathogenic avian influenza in Canada since December of 2021. The scale of the current worldwide HPAI, it's AI, outbreak is unprecedented and continues to have significant impacts on Canadian poultry industry. CFIA acknowledges that this is a challenging situation for everyone involved, including animal owners, producers, animal health professionals, and communities. CFIA has acted to minimize the risk of the virus spreading within Canadian flocks and to other animals. all avian influenza viruses, particularly H5 and H7 viruses, have the potential to infect mammals, including humans. Our disease response is aimed to protect public and animal health, minimize impacts on the domestic poultry industry and the Canadian economy. This supports Canadian families and poultry farmers whose livelihoods depend on maintaining international market access. In domestic poultry, including ostriches, this is accomplished through timely depopulation of domestic birds on infected premises, implementing strong biosecurity measures, and properly disposing of carcasses from birds exposed to the disease. These disease control measures are consistent with the CFIA's mandate under the Health of Animals Act and align with World Organization for Animal Health guidelines. Depopulation can be a distressing outcome for an animal owner. When a depopulation is necessary, the CFIA provides an opportunity for all poultry farmers to develop the most appropriate plan based for their flock and facilities. CFIA veterinarians and inspectors work with poultry farmers to see that depopulation is completed humanely using internationally accepted methods. We also provide guidance to producers throughout the process of depopulation, disposal, and cleaning and disinfection so they can resume their operations as quickly as possible. Most infected premises start the depopulation process within days of confirmed cases of HPAI. When depopulation is completed, producers may be awarded compensation in accordance with the Health of Animals Act and under the Compensation for Destroyed Animals and Things regulations. Compensation is based on the fair market value of animals. For ostriches, compensation of up to $3,000 per bird may be awarded when there is supporting documentation. While compensation may not offset the emotional toll of depopulation, it can provide resources to recover and reestablish operations. The CFIA takes the responsibility to protect the health of animals and Canadians extremely seriously as we conduct these necessary disease control measures to protect public health and minimize the economic impact on Canada's poultry industry.
Okay, now let me say this.
Sure.
If that was humans,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and they're calling, they're calling these birds, okay.
Yeah.
But what if it was humans?
They should quarantine them.
Okay.
Yeah.
They are quarantined and they're still alive and they're not sick. But what if it was humans?
But they're not humans.
Okay,
And
I'm just
unlike
saying,
humans, they
they're
are
pretty close.
They're living in close quarters, as you saw, all together.
Yeah.
And so the likelihood of that virus being present in other birds in that flock is just about 100%.
Well, look at humans, though. Okay, we interact as a society completely similar to that. Okay, whether we like it or not, we touch doorbells, we touch door handles, we touch railings, we touch buttons, all kinds of stuff. Okay, you can get as close as you know what I mean. But if it was a human scenario.
It's not a human scenario, though, Ruddi.
But if it was,
but it isn't.
If it was a human scenario, they wouldn't be calling for killing all these humans, would they?
Well, it depends on which conspiracy theorist you're listening to on a
you know what I mean?
basis. Okay.
You know what I mean? So this idea of just culling all these birds to solve a problem is not the way to go, is what I'm saying.
But do you understand the logic?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So we can disagree with it or agree with it or whatever. Now, the biggest, so the farm owner is being compensated financially.
No. They're trying to keep these birds alive because of the research that they're producing. Okay,
there's that aspect.
The immune
I don't know
system.
I don't know what the
these are not poultry.
Yeah.
Okay, these are ostriches. Their immune system is totally different than what poultry is. Okay, so the government is way off base when it comes to the real look of what is going on here. Okay, regarding these ostriches, I'm not as tuned in as I should be with it. I mean, the best one to get a real outtake on this would be the daughter. What's her name? Kelsey. I could hook you up with her.
That makes more sense. H5N1. Sorry, go ahead.
I could hook you up with her. You could get an interview with her and she'll blow your mind. Okay. When it comes to this, because she knows her stuff more so than I do. But I agree
No,
with
that's
what
not your
I had
issue.
her on my show one time, and I tell you, it's unbelievable what she'll
Mhm.
tell you regarding what these birds are capable of doing, regarding the
Uh-huh.
research that they're capable of. It's unbelievable. What the government is doing here is totally wrong. Okay, when you really hear it from the reality side of the coin, and she's
All right.
best
Well, all right.
to
So
do that.
let's move
We'll
on
leave it with
because
that.
if we're if we need a stronger argument than
I'm
what
glad
you're
we
able to
put a
provide,
segment
then
in there.
I should talk to the
Yeah,
woman who's
I'm
at
I'm
the
glad
start.
we were able to put a segment in there, a little
Sure.
awareness, and we should get her on your show.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, it's
you know,
clearly
to
controversial and two
yeah,
sides to the story.
sure,
At
yeah,
least
but
two
she knows
sides,
her
maybe
shit.
more.
She knows the
But
whole,
I do
you know.
understand why the government wants to kill the birds, and I think they did in February.
No, they're still alive.
Are they still alive?
There's still 400 of them alive, and what the CBC told you about the number of sick birds, that was false. There was only 2 birds that died, and all the rest are still up and walking and quite healthy, and there's no problem with them. They're not showing any signs of sickness whatsoever. They're completely healthy, and they're not poultry. I mean, they're not on the food chain. Okay, so I mean, this is not for human consumption. This is for research, and this
But
is where the
it's not
government's
just,
well
but
is.
I don't think the issue is just about whether you get to eat, whether you eat them, whether the disease spreads though, Rudy. It's, if the birds are, you know, if, if the birds exist and they're infected, then it
Well, ducks
represents an
exist.
issue, right?
Ducks exist. That's where they got it from,
Yeah. Well,
and
maybe
they
they don't want to
exist.
spread it to
So,
more
what are you going to
ducks.
kill all the ducks?
Well, I don't know if they got it from the ducks.
Well, that's what they where they got it from.
And when you have all these birds living in closed quarters, even if they're sometimes outside, as you saw there, they're all together, and so they're
But if their
spreading it
immune
between each other.
system, takes care of that disease, and they're
But
still able to be up and healthy,
they already had
they're
some of the
not
birds
showing signs
die.
of sickness.
But some of
Okay,
them did show signs of
no,
sickness, and
just
some of
2
them
of them,
died.
just
Well,
2
that's
out
what
of
you're
400.
saying. That's not the information that we have from the
No,
government
but
or
that's not
media.
that wasn't accurate information, and
So
she could
okay,
tell you, she could tell you what I'm telling you. Um, so I could be, um, um, you know,
well, I mean, I've got numbers in front of me that contradict what you're saying,
yeah,
so
but she would
I don't know.
contradict that for truth because
Okay,
it's her
so
farm.
let's
You know,
move on.
yeah.
Okay,
You picked the subject this time, and then we got to cut her short.
sure.
Okay.
Okay, how about you post national state?
Post national state.
Yeah, yeah. Everybody's always talking about how Trudeau came out and said that Canada is a post national state. You know what I'm
What
talking about?
exactly does that mean?
That's a very good question. That's something
Okay.
that I've been hitting the rewind button on a little bit myself
What is a
because
post national
because
state?
I have to apologize to people because I think I've misinterpreted somewhat what Justin
Okay.
Trudeau meant by that.
Okay.
All right, so in 2015 Justin Trudeau came out and told, I think it was New York Magazine in an interview, that Canada was the world's first post-national state. Now, a lot of people latched onto that, and they have actually woven that into the concerns about things like the World Health Organization, World Economic Forum, and on and on and on, for as part of just a web of concerns that people have. So when you hear that, Rudy, what do you think that would mean?
I wouldn't have a clue.
Post national state?
That doesn't mean anything to me.
I think
A
that's part of the
post
problem. Yeah.
a post national state?
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't have a clue. I'd have
So
to look into that. I'd have to see what that
yeah.
meant to actually
So
know what that meant.
all right. So maybe it's not the best subject to discuss tonight.
That's over my head, that one.
Okay. I mean, I will say this, and we can have a little bit of a discussion on it, I guess. I took that to mean that Trudeau viewed Canada, and this is the way I think most people interpret that statement, that it is an acknowledgement that Canada does, and he's also said that it doesn't have like a distinct culture. All right. And I took that to mean that that's giving up on Canada, that Canada, in Trudeau's eyes, is not really a country anymore, and that he is ready to turn over sovereignty to world organizations like the United Nations. All right. And just turn over decision making and authority to international bodies and become part of a new world order, a one world government. Would you say that that might be a lot of people assess it that way? Wouldn't that make sense in interpreting that phrase in that way?
Well, that would be kind of like a hidden message, because I like right now, when
Yeah.
you said that to me, I wouldn't have a clue what that meant.
Mhm.
Okay. Not unless you're going to sit there and explain it to me. And
Yeah.
after you explain it to me, to say that we would become a part of that and give up our sovereignty,
Mhm.
I would have to say I disagree with doing that.
Yeah, me too. And you see, so I hear, like you mentioned, like Mark Friesen, for instance. Okay, so there's a guy who's latched right on to that quote from 2015 of Trudeau's. He makes the most of that with his narrative. And I listened to people like Mark Friesen, some time back, and that formed my view of what the the definition of that quote should be. But as I've hit the rewind button on it, I've come to realize that that's not really a full context.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, it kind of is the opposite again, because so much of what is being spun out there to even scare people is either not fully explained, it's out of context, or it's conflation.
Yeah.
So here's what it actually means.
Okay.
So Trudeau in 2015 described Canada as the first post-national state. New York Magazine. He says, quote, "There is no core identity, no mainstream in Canada." And he suggested that Canada's identity is defined by shared values such as openness, respect, compassion, willingness to work hard, to be there for each other, to search for equality and justice, rather than a singular cultural or historical native. So this concept of a post-national state, it obviously sparked a lot of debate and interpretation from people like Mark Friesen, who used to be with the PPC, may still be, created this Buffalo Party. And,
Yeah.
I think he's also largely a separatist himself. But anyway, so,
I have to agree.
so what does Trudeau mean by a post-national state? What did he really mean by it? I never dug enough into this, and I should have, because especially now that I'm back in journalism, I owe it to the public to do that, regardless of whether it sits well with your worldview or this manufactured world that a lot of people are living in or not. I need to be accurate. So Trudeau's use of the term post-national state reflects a vision of Canada as a country that transcends traditional notions of nationhood. Not to say that it's not a country. He's looking at it through a different lens, which this view is rooted in a shared ethnic, cultural, traditional nationhood is rooted in a shared cultural or historical identity. Like, we're a white ethno Anglo-Saxon country because we all came from Europe and England and Scotland and France, blah, blah, blah. Right. So, but instead he's emphasizing now a pluralistic, inclusive model of nationhood, which is driven by diversity and universal values. Key aspects are those are key aspects of his intended meaning, and they include embracing diversity as central to identity, shared values over historical narrative, a new model of nationhood, moving beyond colonial roots, those kinds of things. Okay, so the way I interpret the larger view of the information is, if you go back to like the 1960s, 1970s, when Pierre Elliott Trudeau, his father, was pushing this sort of progressive agenda. That's where, when I was in school as a kid, I learned about the cultural mosaic of Canada versus the cultural melting pot of the United States, where down there, people were encouraged to, or even required to some degree culturally, required to give up a lot of their cultural identity, or they tried to do that, to melt them into a homogenous brew of Americana or whatever it is that they thought they were creating. Up here, especially since the 60s, Canadians, as we've had people come into the country, wherever you're from, you're told you can keep your culture. If you're from France, you get to continue to speak French.
Multiculturalism.
Right, that's what it is. Okay,
Multiculturalism.
so that it's
That's what Canada was.
Right.
Is.
That's what it was, sort of has been, especially since the 60s. And so rooted in that, you get, tolerance. So as Trudeau Jr. becomes prime minister, he's embracing this new idea of, or an expanded idea of that. So he's calling it a post-national state because he's viewing it sort of as the antithesis or the opposite of, say, fascism or ethno-fascism, Nazism, or the creation of an ethno-state where it's like primarily or focused on like white nationalism, or you could have like another country where it could be black nationalism or whatever it might be. So it's not a country that has its foundations and its cohesion based on the ethnic or even the singular cultural identity of a group. He's saying that Canada is beyond a national or a nationalistic kind of nationalism. It's a post-national nationalism where the country is cohesive because of all of its diversity. Because out on the East Coast, you have, a different accent. The culture there is different. We just watched out of New Brunswick, the premier there released this video talking about all the things that make New Brunswick great. Talking about they invented hockey there. They know that the colder the water, the tastier the lobster.
The history of the country,
or the province or the region, right? Quebec is, Yves-Francois Blanchette says that it's its own nation. Well, it isn't, but it is. It's sort of a nation within a nation, and we're very tolerant of that. And they have their own culture. They're French, and that's a lot different than what you get in Alberta. That's different than what you get in Southern Ontario. It's all different. And then you've got all the different cultures and the different skin colors and the different religions.
So to sum up beyond that, to sum that up, for him to come out with a statement like that, okay, he completely sidesteps the fact that Canada has a lot of history. Okay. I mean, we got Stompin' Tom Connors. We got, the list goes on. Okay. And it goes way back. It goes way back to God knows when. I mean, right back to wherever. I mean, Canada is Canada. Canada has a culture. Its whole being is a culture. Okay. And we all came together in a multiculturalist way. Okay. And we made it work. Okay. Canadians built this country, and here we are. We're standing with freedom, the right to free speech, the right to this, the right to that, which is totally different than what the Americans have. Okay. So for Trudeau to come out and sum it up in that kind of a statement, and then I have to sit here to figure out what the fuck it means. It tells you. It tells you how sidetracked this guy wants to put everybody.
Except,
you know what I mean?
Except here's the thing, right? And this is why, as a journalist, I apologize for not looking at this more closely.
No, that's
a long
okay.
time ago.
I mean, I'm very,
to everybody. I'm apologizing to the audience, to the public, for me not being more thorough a long time ago. The accusations being made by Mr. Friesen and others about this post-national statement, it's also not really accurate.
Exactly.
Because if you think about it, Ruddi, and again, Justin Trudeau's sin here is not in the statement itself. It's in not being clear with Canadians. This is where he
Exactly.
has failed, because the things that you just talked about, what Canada has been, what makes Canada strong, how we
Mhm.
come together and we don't fight, we don't go to war with each other, how
Yeah.
we've created this great nation that deserves to be saved. In
Yeah.
reality, if you really look at the true meaning of what he means by a post-national state, which is to
Yeah.
say what I just said before, he's really agreeing with you.
Mm-hmm.
But he chose this complex concept that he's trying to convey to the public in this very short, descriptive title or statement, right? This name that he's applying to it that is not self-explanatory and is actually being used by his political enemies to flip it upside down to make it sound like he is
Manipulation.
a traitor to the country because
Yeah.
he's betraying our heritage and our history, and therefore wants to actually give up the country and our sovereignty. When in reality, he's saying sort of the opposite, where he's saying, no, Canada is still a country. It is a cohesive country. It's not that we have a singular identity.
You know,
We have
his
multiple
dad,
identities within our federal identity, which
his
is to say
dad.
we have nations within the nation. First
Yeah.
nations are nations within a nation. He's acknowledging that aspect of our
Yeah.
society. And I didn't really understand it either. I thought it was like you. I thought he was just saying, Canada's not even really a country. We might as well just give it up to the WHO or the WEF.
You know, his dad
Yeah.
was like that too. His
Mhm.
dad would talk a certain way, and I call it gibberish. It was so bad I couldn't
Yeah.
stand listening to the guy. Okay, really. I mean,
Yeah.
he would be saying one thing that you're trying to figure out, and I've done it. I seriously, I tell you,
Yeah.
I sat there and listened intently,
Yeah.
okay, to every word he said,
Mhm.
to figure out what the hell he was talking about, okay, or saying, okay. And to this day, I still don't know what he was talking about, okay,
Yeah. Well,
because it was so twisted, okay, that
that's his legal training, right?
you know what I mean.
He was an intellect. Yeah.
I mean, it was
Yeah.
so no
They
layman's terms at all,
well,
okay.
that's why they call it. Do you know what his nickname was?
What?
Pierre Elliott Trudeau.
What?
They called him the Philosopher King.
Oh,
No,
I
really,
thought
they
he was
did.
the worst philosopher I ever heard.
Well,
Okay,
nevertheless,
because I
that's
couldn't
because
understand a damn
yeah,
thing
and
he was saying.
he
Okay,
he had quite an intellect. He did.
yeah, he may have done that
Yeah.
or been that,
Yeah.
but as far as being able to throw that out to be understandable,
Yes.
uh-uh,
To
uh-uh.
you have to take these messages and simplify them so the average person can understand it. And
Oh, it
again,
was
and yeah,
ferocious.
and that's
It
where
was
Justin
ferocious.
Trudeau kind of failed the public there too, and hurt himself, hurt his prime ministership.
Oh
That's
yeah,
and so a lot of these things that over time he's just been unable to push back
articulate,
against this stuff, and yeah, not communicate
articulate
effectively with the
to
public.
the average person.
And so
Okay,
it's
because he
ironic, though,
seems
isn't
up
it?
here and
Yeah,
you're over here,
yeah,
and that is not how you want to be a leader. Okay, you want to be able to see eye to eye with the people,
yeah,
because if you're not eye to eye with the people, then you're like gibberish to me. Okay,
sure.
and if you're going to make it so that it's ununderstandable and you're going to talk down to me, you're going to get the royal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because
Although I think that some of these guys, I think I'm somewhat guilty of it too here at times. It's not that I want to talk down to people. I think some of these other leaders don't mean to talk down to people.
Mhm,
It's just that when you're taking really complex ideas,
mhm,
even
mhm,
ideologies, philosophy, and you're trying to simplify these concepts and communicate with the public, it's not an easy task to
mhm,
on the fly when being asked in scrums and news
mhm.
conferences to just answer these questions on the fly and simplify these things in short sentences that everybody can understand. You need to, but that's his part of his job. And the irony here is that even as I listened to you speak about how how you view Canada, and then when
Mhm.
I look at what he really meant by and means by
Mhm.
a post-national state, you guys are actually in agreement.
Mhm. And then,
Yeah.
oh, it slipped my mind now. I was right there and it slipped my mind. Can you believe that? Unbelievable.
It's the really concerning thing to me though, Ruddi, is
Mhm.
that you have people out there who do conflate, who do get involved in politics, and then take statements that other people make, or take little bits of information and twist them,
Mhm.
conflate them, cherry pick little facts in order to then take things out of context. I hate it when people lie. I hate it when they lie to
Exactly.
us, and
Exactly.
and those are the people that I really,
Yeah.
really, really am concerned about, and
Mhm.
and that's honestly why I'm so glad you came on here tonight, because I've not only are we seeing that sometimes with, just in the political arena, but we certainly saw it now being exposed thanks to you
Mhm.
through, your work looking at in Rewind, the Freedom
Mhm.
Convoy, because we're
Mhm.
seeing these ulterior motives, these
Well,
hidden
the one thing
motives.
about that
Yeah,
was that everybody was hyping it so badly. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
The heroes, the heroes, the heroes. And if it made a person feel like, geez, if I speak about this and I'm telling you the truth, I'm going to look down upon because I'm saying something that's different
Mm-hmm,
than what you're saying. Okay.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Now, if I'm being put in that position, okay, where I'm supposed to live a lie, that's not right. Okay.
mm-hmm.
And that's not who I want to be as a Canadian, to live a lie.
Me too.
Okay.
Yeah,
So I had to do it. I had to bring out the story
yeah,
and I had to bring out the facts
yeah.
because I for one, do not want to live a lie. Okay. I
Me
want to
too.
live the truth. And
Yes.
that is what we need in Canada is the truth, not a lie.
Yeah,
Okay. So that's what really pushed it to the forefront of saying, hey,
yeah,
these guys are not heroes. Okay. They're zeros. Okay. And I'm not going to look up to a zero. I'm going to treat a zero like a zero.
yeah.
And that's the truth.
Especially a zero that wraps him or herself in a Canadian flag,
Yeah.
claims to be a patriot, but
Yeah.
then really is manipulating other people to do their dirty work, to tear the country apart, and then have them pay in blood.
Have we, us pay the price,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
That wasn't right. Okay. So I did the show 4 times, four shows. We brought out the facts from the people that were really involved and the treatment they got
Mhm.
and why they got it. Okay. Because we were able to connect all the dots and it was unbelievable. Okay. When in fact, these guys are not heroes, they're manipulators and there was a different game going on here.
Mhm.
And that's not right. Okay. So the record had to be straightened and I helped do it. And, people are starting to see the light of it from different perspectives
Mhm.
because it was put out there. And that was the best thing that I could have done was put out a different point of view to what was really going on
Yeah.
instead of bullshit. Okay. Because I don't want to live a bullshit lie.
And I have to say, I ran some of your stuff the other night from your reaction to the election. I have to say, you were hilarious.
Oh, I know. It was a good one.
You were funnier in
Oh,
hell,
yeah.
man, when you were
Yeah.
so upset.
I tell you what happened. Okay.
Yeah.
I was one. Now, this is honest God truth. I was drinking. I was having, because
Really? I
I
didn't
was,
notice.
no, seriously. I was drinking whiskey. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
And I was
That explains
expecting
why.
a win. In
Yeah.
fact, before that
Uh-huh.
show,
Yeah.
I put out the blue wave. Okay. It's going to be a blue wave. We're all good. We're going to be cheering the night through.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were drinking. Okay. A lot of people were drinking.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Everybody was having a drink and watching the numbers. And I'm going to tell you, when we saw it go south, well, I was really pissed off, okay? To say the least. I was fuming, okay?
Yeah.
So I said, okay, and I'll say it again, any of you liberals that voted for that Mr. Carney to be in there after what we just went through, 9 years of it, you got to have rocks in your head. Seriously. Okay. Because how could you do that to Canada? Okay. I mean, Pierre Poilievre was talking about some real change for us all in this country. And you want to go back to another 9 years of what we just went through. Are you crazy? Are you nuts? Okay, I mean, I kept it as cool as I could, but that's what happened.
Yeah, you were a lot more
Voiceful,
passionate.
Well, I was pretty passionate. All right.
You were.
I could have a few more. I could get as passionate as before. I mean, no doubt about it.
It was pretty damn.
But oh no, we got lots more to say on that. That's coming up. But I'll tell you. You know.
Well,
oh yeah.
Well, listen.
I mean, it was a letdown. It was a serious letdown. Okay,
yeah.
For all Canadians, just like the Freedom Convoy 2022, the letdown when the cops come in and thumped heads.
Yeah,
same thing. Okay, I mean, we've had so many letdowns in our country.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we go through this one again, and the numbers, I can't understand those numbers. I really can't. Okay. So there's going to be lots more to be said about that. So coming up on the shows to come.
All right.
So anyway, we should call it a day there.
We're wrapping her up here tonight. And
I appreciate you having me on, Rick. And I'm still knighted, don't forget.
Yes, sir. And I
am one of the knights of the Maverick show.
Yes, you are.
There you go.
Yeah. Let's just as long as we keep it peaceful.
Oh yeah, always.
And
to the point.
Yeah, like like I've said from the very beginning, man, I want to fix this country. I don't want to tear it apart. I don't want to tear it apart.
I agree. But sometimes you're going to have to bring in drastic measures to make drastic means. And this could be something we have to look at. So if Carney wants to fight fire with fire, believe me, he's going to get a good response. Let's hope that we keep it even on point, without some manipulation going on there.
Well, so, as long as we need to make sure we're fighting the right enemy.
Exactly.
Exactly. So with that being said, sir, thank you for joining us on the program.
You're welcome, Rick.
We'll have you back, and we'll continue to pursue clarity and real truth. And
okay, right
Ruddi, thank you so much. And
you're welcome.
I'll see everybody back here tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern, on the flip side.
There's a rumble on the highway, a shadow on the hill. Donald's back in the saddle, and he's rolling in for the kill. Elon bought him Twitter, paid $1 million a vote, said democracy's for sale. Let's get this country on.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.